Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. Story 3, The Lonely Road. Good evening. My name is Mariana. I'm in my early 30s, married, and have a son who started school some time ago. Until recently, I used to make a trip on a dirt road to visit my mother, Mrs. Tiana, who lives on a remote farm in the mountains of West Virginia. She grows fruits and makes homemade preserves. It's simple work, but it has always sustained our family because she sells the jars to people in the region. I've been helping with this business for a long time, going back and forth between her house and mine, delivering orders to people who live in nearby communities. Even though many friends and relatives have warned me about the dangers of that road, I never paid much attention because I grew up in that area. Since childhood, I've accompanied my mother in her work and always saw her laboring in the orchard. I learned to drive early, first a motorcycle, then a small ATV I bought from a very old neighbor, but it still works today. I got used to the silence of the road, the steep climbs, and the mud after rain. When it rains hard, the road becomes almost impassable, but we try to manage. A few years ago, many bad things happened around there. There were armed groups that appeared out of nowhere. Some people disappeared. Others were found dead in places where no one would think to look. At that time, almost everyone who could avoided passing through the road. I remember my mother crying, not knowing what to do with the fruits that weren't being transported. I also stayed a good period without going up to help her. It was too risky, but after some time, the situation calmed down. Not that it improved 100%, but those frightening rumors stopped circulating about people being stopped, searched, or worse. Even so, from time to time, someone would find traces of violence, like bullet casings or stains in the brush, reminding us that danger wasn't completely gone. But even when everything seemed to have returned to normal, some stories started circulating. Some said that in certain curves, a dark form would appear, as if it were someone crouched down. Others spoke of a figure huddled behind a tree that could appear at night, almost always in stretches where some tragedy had occurred. When I heard these stories, I thought it was just something to scare the more naive. However, I confess that after I returned to making the journey alone, I started feeling a different discomfort, a strange sensation I can't explain. Even so, I went every weekend, and when I had time, I spent days helping my mother package the preserves. The customers from the village eagerly awaited the homemade sweets, and I had no one to replace this service. My husband Murillo even tried to accompany me sometimes, but he has his work, and my son stays with his grandmother during the week, so I ended up taking on this routine by myself. My father lives in the city, but sometimes appears to help with the orchard. He's the one who fixes the warehouse roof and makes repairs to the house. My mother has always been very connected to faith. Even without attending church regularly, she likes to receive blessings from a healer who lives nearby. Once she insisted I wear a red ribbon on my arm. She said it was good for warding off the evil eye and any bad energy. At first, I thought it was excessive, but I started wearing it out of consideration for her. I didn't pray or anything, but I liked knowing I had that little ribbon as a kind of protection symbol. One day I needed to go up to the farm in the middle of the week in the afternoon, something I almost never did because the flow of orders was smaller during school periods. But a good chance appeared to sell more preserves at a local fair, so I organized myself to resolve everything. I had slept little the night before because I stayed up finishing labels and was a bit tired. The trip going up was peaceful, although the road was full of ditches due to heavy rain the day before. I stayed at my mother's house until it got a little dark, helping to label the jars. She, noticing it was going to rain again, warned me, "Daughter, it's better to stay here. In the morning, you can go down early." But I was determined to get home that night. I wanted to leave everything prepared for the next day. My husband had stayed with our son, and besides, I needed to separate the deliveries. Before leaving, I carefully checked the ropes that tied 2 large boxes behind the ATV to make sure they were secure. I ended up saying goodbye and took the ATV. It was already dark. I turned on the headlight and went slowly. About 15 minutes later, I noticed the drizzle was going to turn into real rain. The drops started hitting my face, and the mud made the ground slippery. Everything was very still, without wind noise or anything like that, but the trees creaked from time to time. I tried to stay calm. I know every curve, but with rain, it gets complicated. At each puddle, I reduced speed so as not to fall into holes deeper than they seemed. I passed through a more open curve near a ravine where the brush was low. It was at this point that for the first time I had the sensation of having seen something on the side of the road. I couldn't define it very well, but it looked like a man sitting, or maybe it was just a tree trunk. I kept looking from the corner of my eye, trying to understand what it was. The headlight illuminated a dark shape, but when I got closer, I couldn't distinguish anything beyond twisted branches. So I concluded it was just vegetation. I continued for a few more minutes, and the rain started getting heavier to the point where I could barely see anything. I managed to reach a slightly flat stretch where a farmer keeps some cows, but there are no wire fences or anything that could whistle in the wind. I had the impression I heard a whistle, but I didn't see anyone there. I found it strange because at that hour, and with that weather, no one would stay outside. I gripped the handlebars, swallowed hard, and continued forward. After a hill, I started feeling more tired than normal, even a bit dizzy. Maybe it was the combination of worry, lack of sleep, and physical effort. You know when it seems like the air gets heavy. I made an effort not to slow down too much, otherwise the ATV would slip. At that moment, something made me look to the right. There was an enormous tree with an inclined trunk. Underneath it, I had the sensation of seeing a somewhat hunched shadow. I couldn't say if it was a person or if I was imagining things. The headlight caught it at an angle, and that dark outline simply disappeared. I got chills, not from cold, but from pure discomfort. I passed by carefully and continued ahead. My heart was beating hard. I repeated to myself that it was just fatigue. I tried to distract myself with the engine noise and the music coming quietly from my cell phone. But in the last curve before entering a more inhabited stretch, I felt a strange weight on my back, as if someone had leaned against me. It was so sudden that I lost a bit of control of the direction for a second. I thought it might be the preserve box loose, but when I reached back to check, the box was firm in place, the same way I had left it at my mother's house. But the sensation of having someone there became stronger, as if a body were glued to me. My first impulse was to brake, but part of me screamed not to do that. It was as if it were too dangerous to stop in the middle of a muddy hill with something stuck to me. At the same time, I felt a light touch at my waist level. It wasn't wind, it wasn't the rain cape, or anything that made sense. It seemed like a firm but silent hand. I was left without action. I tried to focus on the road, but my arms started trembling. I've never been one to pray, but I remembered the red ribbon my mother gave me. I pressed the arm where it was tied without taking my eyes off the road. I don't know what happened, but that presence seemed to become slower, as if it were undecided. I felt a light tremor running through my body. Then I heard a strange noise, as if something was hitting the ropes that held the box. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. I continued driving without swerving from anything, barely noticing the stones. I just thought about getting home soon, or at least to a part of the road where there were more houses. The rain was still falling, but now I barely felt it. I was more worried about getting out of that situation. At a certain point, when the first lights of some residences started appearing, I noticed the pressure on my back decreased, as if that thing were slipping and giving up staying there. And then suddenly, the weight disappeared. I didn't stop driving until I reached the small village before my house. I stopped only when I saw a lit streetlight. I needed a minute to breathe because I almost lost strength in my legs. I didn't have the courage to check the box in detail at that moment, but I looked it over, and apparently everything was intact. I left quickly. I got home and don't even know how I managed to sleep after that. I stayed trembling for a while without telling my husband anything. The next day, I needed to wake up early to take care of the deliveries at the fair. Later, I talked to my mother and told her everything. She looked at me worried and just said, "Sometimes certain bad things remain trapped in those places. Keep wearing that ribbon, you hear." The following Sunday, I went to a simple celebration at the nearest chapel. I asked the priest to bless me without going into details. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "May your paths be protected." And that's all I can tell. I don't know for sure what happened to me that night, whether it was the result of accumulated fear or if there really was something hovering on the road. I only know I don't want to go through that again. Today I only go up to the farm during the day, and when it's not possible, I prefer to spend the night at my mother's house. What I saw or felt is beyond my understanding, but I continue living my life, following what I have to do, keeping an eye on the red ribbon I carry as if it were part of me. Sometimes I still make that journey, but never again at night, never again alone when darkness falls on those mountain roads. The memory of that weight on my back, that silent presence, stays with me as a reminder that some roads carry more than just travelers. My mother was right about one thing: certain places hold on to what happened there. And sometimes, if you're not careful, if you're not protected, those things might try to follow you home. The red ribbon she gave me isn't just fabric and thread. It's a connection to something older, something that understands the darkness better than I ever could. When people ask me about that night, I tell them what I've told you. Not everyone believes it, and I understand why. It sounds impossible, like something from a ghost story or an overactive imagination. But I know what I felt, and I know I wasn't alone on that road. The preserves still need to be delivered, the business still needs to run, and life goes on. But I've learned to respect the warnings, to listen to the old wisdom, and to never underestimate what might be waiting in the shadows of a lonely mountain road. Sometimes, late at night when I'm falling asleep, I can still feel that weight, that presence. It reminds me that some encounters leave marks that never quite fade, and some roads are best traveled in the light of day, with protection close at hand, and never, ever alone. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Good evening. My name is Romulus Castro. I'm 39 years old, and I still feel a light shiver when I remember what happened a few years ago in rural North Carolina. It's not easy to talk about this, but I think it's important to tell someone who might understand what occurs in certain places. Everything started after a complicated phase that turned my routine upside down. Until then, my wife Julia and I lived in a small apartment where we paid rent. I worked as a private driver for a small company while she did odd jobs as a general services assistant. We faced financial difficulties, especially after spending months trying to save money to buy some land, but nothing worked out. With help from a distant relative, we finally managed to get a simple lot in a remote area. It was like relief. We managed to build a basic little house with everything counted, but that represented our dream. However, we had barely started feeling stable when the company I worked for suddenly shut down operations. We received compensation much smaller than expected, which left many bills overdue. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Eulalia Mendes, then came up with the proposal for us to go live with her, as she was alone in a big house. She argued that she needed company because of her age and offered us a room. Julia thought the idea was great, but I hesitated. I never had a peaceful relationship with Mrs. Eulalia. I always felt there was something about her manner that bothered me, although she was polite most of the time. I also remembered vague stories about her life, as Julia said her mother kept some family secrets and avoided talking about the past. Even so, with bills piling up, we had no alternative but to accept the offer. The place was in a rural area full of older constructions. When we arrived, the first thing that caught my attention was the dark wooden gate with some carved marks that didn't look like mere designs. It opened creaking, but the house inside was well preserved, almost too immaculate. It was spacious, with thick fabric furniture and countless religious paintings. Mrs. Eulalia received us smiling, but those eyes seemed to evaluate me as if they wanted to discover something I wasn't ready to reveal. We settled in a room in the back that, despite being large, had infiltrations and a musty smell. The ceiling made crackling sounds frequently, which made me uncomfortable. On the first night, I had the impression of hearing light noises above us. They sounded like dragged steps, but I tried to convince myself it would just be wind or some bird. I commented on this to Julia in the morning, but she was practical. She said it should be a cat walking on the roof or dry leaves falling off. She asked me not to worry and to try to relax, since we were there to save money and look for new job opportunities. In the following days, I tried to adapt. I fixed small repairs, cleaned the yard, and looked for some temporary work. Mrs. Eulalia made a point of preparing meals for us, always using different herbs that, according to her, were great for strengthening the body. Julia also helped in the kitchen, and sometimes I heard the two of them laughing together. When I noticed the bitter taste of a tea she served me, I found it strange. I asked Mrs. Eulalia what it was made of. She said she gathered various dried plants and that it removed bad energy from the body. Despite my distrust, I tried not to create conflict. But after that, I started getting a light numbness in my tongue every time I drank the tea. One day, while looking for a toolbox in the pantry near the back area, I noticed a gap closed by a piece of wood. I pulled it unintentionally and found a small room, stuffy and without windows, full of pots and bottles with dark liquids. There were small cloth dolls, wrapped bundles hanging, and something that made me step back, a handful of hair tied with string. I felt a different kind of chill. I didn't want to call Julia because I imagined it might just be some old habit of Mrs. Eulalia's. I preferred not to touch anything and closed the door. After that, I started noticing that my mother-in-law had a very peculiar routine. She left the house sometimes, always at dawn, and returned with her hands dirty with earth, saying she was planting seedlings in the surroundings. I didn't see any seedlings. There were no shovels or hoes in the yard, and the only plants there were already old. I started paying more attention to what was happening. One afternoon, I found a dead chicken outside with a cut in its throat. While I tried to bury the animal, I noticed drawings made with white powder near the trunk of a tree. I showed this to Julia, but she just said it must be children's pranks from the neighborhood or some protection ritual her mother did. She spoke so calmly that she almost convinced me, but part of me felt there was something bigger behind it. After a few weeks, my dreams started getting strange. They didn't quite reach clear nightmares, but I saw myself in a tight place with dark walls where I felt difficulty breathing. I woke up uncomfortable with sweat on my forehead and a tightness in my chest. The morning after one of those dreams, I went to see if I could get a hammer in the pantry and ended up looking again at the door of the hidden little room. It was ajar. Something made me peek. The shelves were full of melted candles and small pots with pieces of paper inside. I didn't stay there long. I went back to the room without saying anything to Julia. I was afraid of seeming paranoid. Even so, the feeling of strangeness only increased. Mrs. Eulalia, despite always smiling, looked at me with an expression of someone who knows more than they should. She spent afternoons preparing roots and drying herbs in the back of the house. One night while trying to sleep, I heard again that noise above our room. It seemed like some object being dragged slowly. I got up, took the flashlight, and tried to climb into the ceiling space, but there was no visible access inside. I stood there with the flashlight on, not knowing what to do. I ended up going back to bed without discovering anything. I woke up with body aches as if I had been kicked in the back. I showed Julia some bruised marks, but she said I could have hit some corner. That explanation sounded too simple to me, but I didn't want to insist and create a bad atmosphere between us. It was then that Mrs. Eulalia came with a strange conversation during lunch. She asked if I was sleeping well. She said she heard me get up at dawn and wanted to know if I was worried about something. I found it invasive, but replied that everything was fine. She just smiled and continued eating. The weeks dragged on. I couldn't find steady work, just some occasional jobs that barely helped with the bills. Julia started getting closer to her mother, helping with chores and shopping, while I felt like an inconvenient guest. One day I needed to check an infiltration near the kitchen. When I crouched down to look inside a cabinet, I saw a cloth bag rolled up with a red ribbon. I opened it out of curiosity and found cut nails, hair strands, and something written on a stained piece of fabric. I closed it quickly, put it back, and pretended I didn't see it. I couldn't get that out of my head. I had the feeling someone was doing some kind of spell. I tried to talk to Julia, but she looked at me worried and said I was exaggerating, and that deep down her mother was just an elderly lady with old customs. The nights continued bad. I went back to dreaming about the same tight place, but now there was a female silhouette in the corner. I couldn't see the face because it was covered by a dark veil. I woke up sweaty and tense, trying to remember if that could be a reflection of some conversation or movie. One late afternoon, I went out for a walk and ended up talking to an old man who sold medicinal plants. I explained briefly that I found the house where I was staying somewhat strange. He listened to everything quietly and in the end handed me a small branch, saying, "This here helps protect against the evil eye. Put it in a glass with water and leave it near the door." I did as he said but didn't tell anyone. On the first night, I slept a little better. I felt less agitation and woke up with less anxiety. Still, there was a heavy atmosphere in the house. Mrs. Eulalia didn't say anything, but I noticed she gave a long look at that branch as soon as she passed through the living room in the morning. 2 days later, I found the branch fallen on the floor, dry and trampled. It looked like someone had kicked or thrown it there on purpose. I didn't want to draw hasty conclusions. I just threw it away. In that same period, Julia told me she felt too tired and with constant nausea. We suspected pregnancy. We did a quick test, and it was positive. It would be our first child. I should have been happy, but I felt a tightness in my chest that I can't explain. From that day on, Julia started sleeping earlier and waking up even later. Mrs. Eulalia took care of her with tea after tea, saying they were family recipes. I noticed Julia started wearing some old necklaces I had never seen before and always put them on before sleeping. One dawn, I woke up to go to the bathroom and found Julia in the kitchen, sitting at the table, staring at the wall. When I said her name, she took a while to react and then acted as if she didn't remember leaving bed. We attributed this to hormonal changes. Despite this, it came to my mind that something was influencing her behavior. I looked for someone in my contact network who understood blessing or something like that. That's when I reached a man known as Mr. Florencio. They said he understood rituals and cleaned bad environments. I talked to him on a cloudy day. I explained the nighttime noises, the strange objects, the bitter teas, and the pregnancy. He recommended I keep coarse salt near the windows and burn a special herb. He also said I shouldn't drink anything prepared by my mother-in-law until I was sure what was happening. I returned home with coarse salt and a package of herbs that produced thick smoke when burned. I planned to light that at dawn, but needed to wait for a chance when Mrs. Eulalia wasn't around. On the first night I tried, I heard a noise in the living room as if someone was passing by dragging their feet. I turned off the lights and stood behind the door. When I came out to look, there was no one there, but the chair was out of place. I didn't touch anything, just went back to the room with my heart racing. The next day, Julia commented that she had a strange dream in which her mother appeared in a room full of candles, murmuring something incomprehensible. I asked if she was worried, but she replied that she was feeling at peace next to her mother. I found this curious because Julia used to be more critical. I then decided to risk burning the herbs in the kitchen on a night when Mrs. Eulalia would have gone out to pray, as she said. I prepared everything around 2 in the morning. I lit the charcoal, threw in the leaves, and started praying the Lord's Prayer quietly, because it was the only prayer I remembered by heart. The smoke spread quickly. I felt heat rise up my face and a stab of pain behind my neck. At that moment, I heard the front door open. I ran to put out the herbs, but they burned so fast that not even blowing solved it. When I finally managed, I was sweating and panting. Mrs. Eulalia came in soon after. She looked at me and asked what I was doing awake at that hour. I tried to disguise it by saying I had insomnia. She didn't insist, but I noticed a slight smile as if she already knew what was happening. 2 days later, I had a serious conversation with Mr. Florencio. I told him I wasn't managing to burn the herbs without being interrupted, and that my wife seemed increasingly attached to her mother. He suggested I get a personal object from Julia and another from Mrs. Eulalia for him to analyze. I waited for an opportunity when Julia went to the bathroom and took a comb of hers. It was full of hair strands. Then, when my mother-in-law came out of the bath, I saw she had left a thin blouse hanging on the line. I took that too, folding it quickly and storing it in a bag. At the end of the afternoon, I took these items to Mr. Florencio. He locked himself away for about 20 minutes, and when he returned, he spoke with a somewhat tense voice. "There's something here that's not from now. It's weaving an old chain between your wife and her mother." I became apprehensive. He handed me a small talisman made of knots and colored threads, and asked me to hang it at the head of the bed, in addition to keeping a bowl of clean water underneath it. He told me not to tell Julia or my mother-in-law anything. I returned home with that in my pocket. I managed to hang it without Julia seeing. In the first days, I slept relatively well, but on the third day, I woke up to a dry noise as if something had fallen. I saw the water bowl overturned on the floor, wetting the entire floorboard. It was as if they had turned it over on purpose. Shortly after, Julia confirmed the pregnancy with a blood test and showed herself happy despite being dejected. I, on the other hand, started feeling a fear I couldn't explain. The house seemed increasingly stuffy, so much so that sometimes I had nosebleeds for no reason. One night I woke up startled when I heard Julia talking quietly in the living room. She was murmuring something similar to a lullaby, looking out the window. I asked what it was, and she said her mother had taught her. She said this in a calm way, but I was disturbed. I decided I needed help from another person, someone who understood more than just herbs and talismans. Mr. Florencio indicated a blessing woman, Mrs. Mertz, who lived in the same region but away from the main village. I went there one early afternoon. I told her everything, from my suspicion about Mrs. Eulalia to the signs I had been finding around the house. She just listened and passed the beads of a rosary through her fingers. When I finished, she said she would come with me and that she would need to face my mother-in-law face to face. I returned home that night with a knot in my stomach. Julia slept heavily, and Mrs. Eulalia had also retired. I sat in the kitchen without turning on any light, listening to the nighttime noises. I had the feeling that the entire house was awake and that I was the only intruder there. The next morning, Julia felt sick again. I decided I had to take her to the doctor. She accepted after some insistence. In the consultation, the doctor said the baby seemed fine, but recommended some more complete exams due to excessive fatigue and slightly irregular blood pressure. When we returned, Mrs. Eulalia was already waiting in the living room with tea ready. Julia accepted right away, but I refused, pretending to have a stomachache. My mother-in-law didn't question it, but she looked at me in a way that made me break into a cold sweat. 2 days later, I took Mrs. Mertz to see the house. I told my mother-in-law she was an acquaintance who came to visit us. She greeted us without showing surprise, invited everyone to sit in the living room, but Mrs. Mertz asked to see the yard and the back of the house. Getting there, Mrs. Mertz frowned when she noticed some marks in the earth near the fence. She stayed silent, looked at me, and made a light sign with her head for us to continue ahead. We went upstairs that led to an improvised basement closed with an old wooden door. When I entered, I felt a strange smell like mold mixed with something sweet. I saw twisted candles on an improvised table, empty bottles, and in the corner, 2 clay pots covered with grimy fabrics. Before I could approach, Mrs. Mertz grabbed my arm. She said quietly, "Don't touch anything. It looks like there's a lot accumulated here." I nodded, swallowing hard. We left the basement, and as soon as we returned to the living room, Mrs. Eulalia was waiting for us, standing with her arms crossed. Mrs. Mertz greeted her again and commented, "Beautiful place. I understand that you like to maintain some family traditions, don't you?" My mother-in-law just smiled, but her smile was cold. She replied that each person has their customs and that we shouldn't judge what we don't know. Julia entered the living room at that moment, somewhat pale, asking if everything was okay. Mrs. Mertz approached her, touched her shoulder, and asked how she felt. Julia murmured something about dizziness and nausea, and the blessing woman just shook her head. That day, Mrs. Mertz pulled me aside and said I needed to get out of there with Julia, especially before the child was born. She explained that old things in the house generated bonds difficult to cut if we stayed too long. I was left without reaction because we had nowhere to go. I told Julia everything the blessing woman said. She was offended, affirmed that her mother would never harm her, and that I was being influenced by gossip. I tried to insist it wasn't quite like that, but she locked herself in the room and didn't want to talk anymore. The weeks passed. Julia was recovering physically, but I noticed she was different. She was more serious, more distracted. Sometimes at dawn, I woke up to drink water and caught her staring at the ceiling without being able to close her eyes. One day I arrived home and found Julia crying quietly in the kitchen. She said she had a nightmare in which her mother was very old, unable to speak, stretched out in the yard of an unknown house. She said it was the first time she dreamed of her mother in such a vulnerable condition. That same week, I received news from an acquaintance who knew about our old lot. He asked if I didn't want to sell it because he knew someone interested. It seemed like the chance to get quick money to get out of there and rent something of our own. Before closing the deal, I went to talk to Mrs. Mertz again. She thought it was positive and encouraged me to sell, but emphasized that if I stayed, there was a great chance of involving the child in something the grandmother was feeding. She didn't ask for details, just said not to hesitate. That's what I did. I sold the lot, gathered the few savings, and told Julia we were going to leave. She complained, but deep down I realized she was relieved. On the morning we packed our things, Mrs. Eulalia didn't even appear to say goodbye. She stayed locked in her room the whole time. When we left with the suitcases, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, although there was still a pang of guilt for having left that way. We went to Julia's aunt's house in the central region. We stayed there until the birth, which occurred without major problems. I had a boy whom we named Hugo. In the first months, everything seemed calmer. Julia recovered her spirits, Hugo grew healthy, nursed and slept well. But sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night with his eyes wide open, looking at a specific point in the room. He seemed to stay quiet as if listening to something. When Hugo turned 3 years old, he started saying he saw an elderly lady in a dark dress who called him by name. I asked what her face was like, but he said you couldn't see it very well. Julia insisted it was a child's imagination, but I wasn't so sure. I still remember the bundles, the candles, the bottles in Mrs. Eulalia's house. In the end, I don't know if it was pure superstition or if there was something really hidden in that house. My mother-in-law continued there until she died months later without us resuming contact. Hugo sometimes comments that he dreams of a voice that calls him to return to an old place. I don't have answers, just the feeling that certain presences continue where we least expect and can cross distances without fanfare. My name is Oliver. I've always lived in a small town surrounded by rolling hills and dusty roads, where everyone has known each other since childhood. I grew up helping my father in the grain store and in the production of homemade whiskey. He was the one who taught me the trade. And so I inherited a small business that sits right in front of the main square, near an old church with cracks in its facade. I had nothing to complain about. In the morning, I would prepare the counter, serve customers who came to buy flour and whiskey in recycled bottles. In the afternoon, I would rest and sometimes drink a shot with acquaintances from the region. Everything seemed the same until the day I met someone again and my life went off the rails. Her name was Victoria. We had known each other since adolescence. Her mother had come from another town, and there were rumors that she practiced strange healings. Victoria disappeared from the village as soon as she turned 20, without saying where she was going. She returned after almost 10 years, driving an old car alone, with much longer hair and a more serious demeanor. She mentioned that she had been working with estheticians and people connected to alternative therapies in the big city. Nobody knew details of what she did. She opened a small business next to a fabric shop, selling oils, handmade soaps, and natural products. When getting close, you could always smell rue mixed with burnt molasses. One ordinary day, when she came to get flour from my store, I greeted her and noticed that her face reminded me of the girl I had known. But her way of speaking seemed different, more reserved, as if she carried something that didn't belong to our routine. After that, I started observing Victoria whenever she appeared. Every morning, I tried to make conversation, offering some exact change or a flower delivery. She thanked me, but didn't extend the conversation. Until one day she said, "I'm not willing to start anything with anyone. I only came back to resolve some pending matters and don't want to get involved." I didn't believe it. It seemed more like a pose from someone who's afraid of getting hurt than a sincere refusal. I felt I needed to prove that I was different, that I would bring something good to her. My solitary routine made me more vulnerable, and I became fixated on the idea of winning her over. If I didn't act, I was sure she would leave again. My desire wasn't just to please, but to be essential to her. So I remembered Madame Gloria, an old lady who lived at the end of a path taken over by weeds, where few houses remained standing. Many people there called her a witch behind her back, but some had already knocked on her door looking for prayers and folk remedies. They said she cured illnesses and fulfilled impossible requests. The stories varied. Some said she was very devout and that everything was just popular belief. Others guaranteed she buried photos of people to attract or drive away loves. I had always been skeptical, but the insistence on having Victoria by my side spoke louder. I took a bottle of my whiskey, some sweet breads, and a photo I printed from social media. Madame Gloria accepted everything without asking much. She put the photo in a clay pot with water and whispered some words I didn't understand. Then she turned to me and said simply, "This girl's soul doesn't let itself be trapped easily. She has a defense that comes from the cradle. If you really want to attract her, you'll have to do something more powerful." She proposed a ritual to fix Victoria's interest in me, but warned that it needed to be for true love or things could go wrong. And I, impulsively, guaranteed that my feelings were sincere. I took all the money I had saved and paid what Madame Gloria asked. She told me to come back 3 nights after sunset and keep my mouth shut about what we were doing. I followed the instructions. When I returned, she made me take off my shoes, smudged my body with smoke from herbs, and placed me in a circle she drew on the wet ground. She lit 3 purple candles, dripped chicken blood into a gourd, and made me repeat Victoria's name along with some strange prayers. At the end, she gave me a package wrapped in red cloth, saying I needed to bury it in the back area of Victoria's business without anyone seeing. That same early morning, I dug a corner behind her storage room and left the package there. In the days that followed, nothing seemed to change. Victoria continued going to my store the same way, speaking little. I even noticed that she seemed a little more receptive, becoming interested in the details of flour grinding or casually asking about the process of bottling whiskey. The conversations were still brief, but there was a truce to the initial coldness. I took advantage of each opening, creating some approximation without forcing it. After a week, however, something different happened. One morning she arrived with a less contained smile, praised my product, asked details about how I toasted the flour, and before leaving, asked me to separate an extra bag. 2 days later, she invited me to enter her shop, claiming it was very hot, and offered me herbal water. We talked without hurry. At the end, she lightly touched my arm and didn't pull her hand away. We started seeing each other more frequently. We would walk in the surroundings at the end of the afternoon, and in little more than a month, we were already daily conversation companions. In less than 3 months, Victoria gave me the key to her house, and soon I moved there. At first, it seemed like a dream. I felt important, loved. She cooked the way I liked, let me choose the music, and even made plans to open a craft whiskey bar with me on the same lot. But gradually, I noticed that Victoria spent a lot of time quiet, looking at empty places. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night, scared, sweaty, but wouldn't explain the reason. I also started having restless dreams, as if there was someone standing near the bed, covered by a dark blanket, watching me. I would wake up with a dry throat, but thought they were effects of the ritual and some promises Madame Gloria had mentioned. Everything has a cost, she had said. What really started to bother me was another matter. Victoria's brother, named Martin, started appearing frequently. He had lived outside and thought himself more experienced than everyone, always talking about contacts and schemes. He would arrive without knocking, mess with the refrigerator, bring a dog that barked nonstop, and still talked about a possible business partnership. Martin boasted, saying he would arrange buyers for everything Victoria wanted to sell. I didn't trust him. I felt he was invading my space, especially when he brought boxes of products and cluttered the house corridor. The situation got worse when he left his stuff everywhere. I even commented to Victoria that her brother should look for a place to stay. She responded dryly, "I don't want confusion. He's going through a difficult period, and as family, I need to help him." At that moment, I realized the relationship was shaking. I felt a stab of fear of losing control. I remembered Madame Gloria and went to her house, taken by anger. I told her everything, Martin's intrusion, the disorder. She listened to the end and then commented, "You don't want love now, but command. Expelling this young man will require another type of ritual, and it's not light." I accepted without hesitation. I needed Martin to leave. Madame Gloria then explained a step-by-step process. I would have to get soil from an old cemetery, choose a grave without identification, collect a handful right in the middle of the night without talking and without looking back, then take everything to her to complete the process. So I did. I waited for midnight, took a hand lantern, and headed to the cemetery. I heard dog barks in the distance. The wind was cold and the smell of wilted flowers was strong. I jumped over a low wall, looked for the most abandoned grave, and dug with my hands until I felt the damp earth. I filled a cloth bag and returned looking forward without turning my face. Madame Gloria was waiting for me with a clay bowl releasing dense smoke. She mixed the earth with ashes and a strange powder. Then she gave me a package wrapped in dark paper, ordering me to leave it on top of the roof of the room where Martin slept. It needed to fall exactly in the center. I waited for nightfall, climbed up grabbing an old beam, and dropped the package in the right place. I didn't sleep that night. It seemed like there were noises on the roof, as if someone was walking up there, but it could have been the wind. The next day, Martin woke up with a swollen eye and a heavy cough, saying he felt pressure in his chest. His dog howled nonstop, and a bunch of ants appeared in one of his boxes out of nowhere. 2 days later, Martin gathered his things and left without explaining anything. I learned from a neighbor that he went to the big city, probably seeking treatment for a fever that wouldn't improve. Victoria gave me a suspicious look, but made no comments. The house then became quieter. She resumed the habit of lighting incense, playing music in the morning, taking care of the plants in the yard. I thought everything would return to normal, but I had no idea what all that ritual had unleashed. Relieved, I started thinking about the idea of setting up our whiskey bar. I talked to Victoria about using the space behind the house where there was an old masonry cottage. She said she needed to organize some things first, but would think about it. I got excited and even started drawing some sketches of what the counter would look like. In the first days after Martin's departure, everything went well. However, the following week, Victoria started having insomnia. I saw her wandering at dawn, barefoot, arranging candles in a corner of the living room near an altar with images of saints and glasses of water. Once I heard her murmuring a prayer in a language I didn't identify. I didn't want to interrupt. I pretended to sleep. The situation became stranger when I discovered a dark stain on the kitchen door frame. I tried to clean it, and it even came off, but the next day it reappeared. That wasn't soot or mold. It had a metallic smell. Victoria looked and said that sometimes incense smoke created stains, but I noticed something different in that iron odor. In the same week, packages arrived in her name: dried herbs, bottles with cloudy liquids, and some small carved wooden objects. She stored everything in the room, locked away. I isolated myself in my space, trying not to interfere, but I was restless. Shortly after, my business started to empty. Neighbors avoided buying from me. They said they felt something heavy in the air. Rumors started that the flour was spoiled. A woman told me her son vomited after eating a cake made with my ingredients. A regular customer complained that my product was bitter. I checked everything, changed suppliers, cleaned the grinder. It didn't help. One day Victoria confessed she was feeling a buzzing in her head and the impression that there was someone watching when she was alone. She asked me if I had been doing anything different, if I had looked for someone to mess with prayers. I diverted from the subject. I said it could be stress. She didn't seem to believe it much. That night I dreamed again of that covered figure, now sitting on a wooden bench. I woke up sore, with body aches. I lit a white candle near my mirror, remembering Madame Gloria's advice, and decided to look for her again. I went up to Madame Gloria's house at lunchtime. It was more cluttered, the walls stained. She opened the door with a tired expression. She listened to my report about Martin, about the stain, about my dreams, stayed silent, measuring me with her gaze, and finally said, "The ritual worked, but you did it moved by anger. When there's no balance, everything comes back deformed." I begged for help again. She explained that the problem wasn't just mine, but that Victoria also had an ancient force in the family, and my actions had messed with that. She suggested a cleansing of the house, but emphasized that if Victoria was doing something on her own, it wouldn't help much. She handed me a package of coarse salt, powder from a dark stone, and a clay statuette. She told me to place them in the 4 corners of the lot, 1 per night, without talking to anyone. If they asked, I should deny it. She also warned me to stop with ambitious plans, because the desire for power in the midst of a contaminated place only attracts more problems. That night I buried the first item under a withered plant pot in the back of the yard. The next day Victoria didn't leave the room, complained of a headache, and asked to be alone. I left food at the door. She didn't touch anything. On the second night, I buried the second object near an acerola tree. I had the sensation that someone was watching me from the window, but I didn't actually see anyone. I heard a noise that could be the wind, but sounded like a sigh. I went to sleep without saying anything. On the third night, it was more complicated. When I was ready to leave, the house light flickered and then went out for a few minutes. When it came back, the television in her room turned on by itself to a channel with no signal. I didn't want to see what it was. I ran to place the third object near the gas cylinder and returned. On the fourth night, I tried again. When I was leaving, Victoria appeared behind me and asked, "What are you doing out there?" I responded with the first excuse that came to mind. "I thought I smelled gas leaking. I went to check." She looked at me without saying anything and went back inside. I waited a while, and only then buried the last item near the clothes washing tank. From then on, she started avoiding me. She barely spoke to me, and at night she stayed in the living room or behind the counter, always with the lights off. The people in the town started to whisper. They commented that at dawn, you could hear moans coming from our house. Dogs barked non-stop in the surroundings, and some even said they felt a sudden chill when passing by the sidewalk. One day I noticed that the family altar in the living room was all disarranged. Melted candles, murky water, and a small towel burned at one end. Nobody had touched there, neither I nor Victoria. I went to clean it, but when I touched the glass of water, I felt a burning in my palm as if it were an ember. I put aloe on it and left it alone. That afternoon, Victoria packed her bags and left without saying goodbye, taking only some clothes. She left a note on the table saying she was going to a distant aunt's house because she felt something was pulling her to a bad place and didn't want to sink completely. She left the business keys and went. I was alone. The house seemed emptier than ever. Every corner seemed to echo. After her departure, the plants in the yard dried up out of nowhere. The light bulbs flickered until they burned out, and the walls became damp with mold. My clothes hanging on the line started to smell moldy even in the sun. Everything was heavy, silent, suffocating. I tried to look for Madame Gloria again, but I found the door closed with chains. There was a note warning that she had gone away to a more isolated place. I asked some acquaintances, but nobody knew anything. I started sleeping with the light on. At dawn, I heard noises like claws scratching the roof. I thought it was a cat, but when I peeked through the crack, I saw something standing there on its back without moving. I didn't have the courage to check up close. I hid until dawn. The next day, I went to a neighboring settlement. They said there was a prayer woman named Miss Flora who lived in a pink house. She attended me without questioning, held my hands, and said I carried a burden as if I had opened a door and hadn't closed it. She made me take an herbal bath, prayed, and recommended that I burn everything strange that existed in the house. I went back and did a cleaning. I threw away the bottles and objects Victoria had left. I burned papers with marks and symbols. That night I slept almost well, but the nightmares returned soon after. I saw a figure sitting on the edge of my bed, as if it had weight and breath. I woke up scared. The candle I had left on the nightstand was out. Without any air current to explain it, I realized that wouldn't disappear so easily. I threw more things away, discarded the old altar. I passed coarse salt on the windows, slept with scissors under the pillow, but nothing solved it. The feeling of disorder only grew. I went back to Miss Flora. She, more serious than before, stated that I wasn't dealing with a normal spirit, but a kind of living trail that fed on my wrong choices. She asked if I had buried something. I confessed yes. She wanted to know if I used cemetery soil. I answered yes again. This energy isn't resolved with bath or prayer. You need to return what you took alone, she said. She explained that I should go to the same cemetery place, take something that symbolized what I had harmed: flowers for feelings, bread for sharing, some of my homemade whiskey to represent my work. I would need to pray softly with my back turned, without looking or reacting to any noise. Then leave the offering and go away. That night I separated a bottle of my newest whiskey, some wilted flowers, and bread I baked myself. I left before midnight. The cemetery remained dark. I entered through the same place as before. It was even colder and more deserted. I found a grave without a name, covered with leaves. I knelt, put the offering, recited the prayer Miss Flora taught me. At a given moment, I heard a buzzing behind me, but I stayed still, eyes closed. I heard footsteps on the gravel. I felt my heart race. When the noise diminished, I got up and left without turning my face. I returned home thinking I would feel some immediate difference. I found the white candle I usually left at the door completely melted, forming a strange design, almost a spiral. I felt a chill, but avoided touching it. I went to lie down fully dressed. I didn't dream that night, but I woke up startled around 3 a.m. with a strong smell, something like sulfur. I walked through the rooms, everything was the same, but the odor became clearer near my sewing room. When I opened the door, I found the statuette Madame Gloria had given me broken into 4 pieces arranged in the shape of a cross. It was impossible for someone to have entered there. I started to realize it wasn't just the house. I felt heavier, slower, as if walking against the current. Sometimes I had the clear impression of hearing my name being called. I stopped opening the business, and the few neighbors who appeared disappeared completely. One day I tried to take corn to the community mill. The young man told me to stay away. He said his wife had a nightmare about me where I appeared with completely white eyes. He was scared. I returned home in silence. A distant relative came to see how I was, but commented that his mother dreamed about me under the earth, full of worms in my mouth. He told me to look for a healer in another town, an experienced woman with these heavy energy things. At first I refused, but that same night that figure returned to appear in my dream. Now with long arms that touched my feet without speaking, but transmitting a sensation that it was sucking my air. The next morning I took a bus to this unknown place, hoping to find someone who could help me. I walked through narrow streets until I reached a simple house with a grimy blue facade. Who answered was a thin lady with a deep gaze. She measured me from head to toe and said I brought an error that was no longer just mine. She let me in without formalities. Her name was Mabel. She led me to a dark room where there was a cross made of rustic wood, asked me to sit, blew a strong aroma of herbs, and asked if I wanted protection or liberation. I answered that I just wanted to end that suffering. She said that for that I would have to face my own flaws. She lit 3 black candles and put a handful of coarse salt in my hand, asking me to tell everything. I talked about Victoria, about Madame Gloria's ritual, Martin, the problems with the house, the dreams. She listened silently. At the end, she commented, "This image that haunts you is not just an illusion, but something that gained strength as you insisted on molding reality to your taste. It became part of you." She said I would need to make a final sacrifice, something that would hurt to break my bond with this energy. She asked if I had any object that symbolized my ambition. I remembered an old notebook where I wrote down the whiskey bar plans that I carried like an amulet. I gave the notebook to her. She asked me to burn it in a small furnace. While the pages caught fire, I felt a stab in my chest as if I was tearing inside. Mabel asked for silence, put a black stone in my hands, and recommended that I not speak anything on the way back, no words. I returned that same day. I entered the house and noticed the air was fresher. There wasn't that strange odor or annoying noises. For about a week, I managed to sleep without jolts, and the oppression almost disappeared. It was in this interval that I started to believe the storm was over for good. The following week, however, I woke up one night and had the impression of seeing something pass in the hallway, but it had no defined form. I went to the urban region, still somewhat restless. I got a simple job at a snack kiosk. I had some hope. I bought new clothes, threw my old backpack in the trash. One delivery day, I spotted Victoria in the distance walking on a busy street. She was thinner, with her hair tied back. She didn't see me, and I preferred to cross the street to avoid contact. That night I dreamed about her. In the dream, Victoria was in our old house, sitting on the floor crying. When I touched her, she transformed into the hooded figure. I woke up scared. In the morning, the kiosk owner came up to talk to me and asked me to leave the improvised room. "Sorry, but people are complaining about noises, lights that flicker, a strange smell." "Can't continue," he said. I left without fighting. I knew it wasn't invention. I managed to shelter in a small room in the back of the kiosk, among flower boxes. Even so, the restlessness continued. At night, I had the impression that something moved around me. Once a customer looked straight into my eyes, dropped the snack on the floor, and said, "It seems like you have no expression at all." I tried to contact Mabel again, but discovered she had also traveled far away with no expected return. A neighbor mentioned she would be absent for an indefinite time because of greater forces she didn't want to face. I was left without alternative. I started to think I was irredeemably marked. I sat in a wasteland watching the sky. I had the sensation that everything silenced, as if the world breathed in suspense. I heard my name coming from the ground, but it could have been my imagination. Even so, I understood I still had a bond with that old town and the house where everything began. I thought I needed to end that once and for all. I wasn't sleeping anymore. The work at the kiosk became painful, and time passed dragging. Everything seemed foggy to me. Food no longer had taste. People's voices sounded distorted. I started having nightmares about a buried house, doors opening by themselves, damp walls. In all the dreams, I saw an extinguished candle when I tried to light it. One late afternoon, I took a bus back to my town. I took only some clothes, a white candle, a small wooden cross, and a small bottle of my whiskey. I arrived when it was getting dark. The street where the house was located was deserted, the atmosphere strange. The gate was rusted, the yard full of dry weeds, and the front door had a scribbled warning, "Do not enter." I pushed anyway. The creaking reminded me of cracking bones. Inside, the smell of being closed up turned my stomach. Everything was so quiet that even my footsteps sounded loud. I lit the candle and placed it in the middle of the living room. I sat in front of it, breathing slowly. For a few moments, nothing. Then I noticed the flame trembling. It split into two. One went out, the other tilted downward. I got up and decided to walk through the rooms. Each space seemed to have its own climate. The bathroom had a damp cold. The room I shared with Victoria was with the bed made, but seemed like no one had slept there for a long time. My sewing corner was messy, with pieces of fabric, old notebooks, and rusty tools. It was as if someone had rummaged through everything after my departure. When passing by a mirror in the hallway, I noticed my reflection looking back with delay. I stopped, raised my hand, but the image didn't follow me. Suddenly, I saw my reflection open a smile that I wasn't making. I continued ahead without looking again. Going to the yard, the guava tree that was once full of leaves was dry and split in half. Where I had buried the objects to protect the house, there was a gaping hole. The earth turned over, almost black. I threw salt there and left the cross and the open whiskey. I stayed quiet for several minutes. Suddenly, I felt a blow inside, like a punch to the stomach. I fell to my knees and vomited a whitish slime. I dragged myself back to the living room. The candle continued lit, but had a reddish tonality. As soon as I approached, it went out by itself. I remained there, lying on the floor. I didn't want to run. I closed my eyes and felt as if something sat on my chest. I didn't fight, let it happen. It lasted some good moments, then disappeared. When dawn came, I woke up alone, the house silent. I got up staggering, went to the kitchen, lit the stove, and made weak coffee. It had an earthy taste, but I swallowed it. I opened the back door and let the air in. It seemed a little clearer outside. I went to an old man who sold firewood on a corner of the road, Mr. Rubens. He recognized me. He said he thought I was dead. I asked if he knew anything about my house during these times. He told me that since I left, nobody approached because they said they heard laments, that the earth there didn't give shade, and even a well dried up by itself. I told part of the story. Mr. Rubens listened, and in the end offered me a small clay sculpture in the shape of a jaguar that his wife made. He said it was for protection and wouldn't charge anything, but recommended that I not stay there anymore. I went back, gathered the remains of the candles, salt, the burned cross, put everything in a bag, and left the door open as if saying goodbye to the house. I walked to the bus stop and took a bus. Nobody wanted to sit near me. I held the small clay Jaguar tightly. Arriving in the region where I was working, I arranged a simple room. I started selling some cakes and flour on the sidewalk without advertising. I spoke little, served whoever wanted to buy. I slept on a small mattress, keeping mirrors covered. One afternoon, a customer asked if I wasn't the guy who lived in that town. I denied it. She looked at me suspiciously and left. That night I dreamed about the dry guava tree, but now it was full of green leaves. In the morning, I saw that the clay Jaguar had a new crack on its back. I never had clear news of Victoria again. Some said she went very far away, others that she was hospitalized to treat mental health. I don't know what really happened. Sometimes I imagine that figure continues out there, entering places or haunting people who messed with things they shouldn't have. But it no longer calls me or appears with such clarity. Deep down, I write this as a reminder. Certain doors shouldn't be opened carelessly, and when they open, it's no use wanting to close them without facing the price. Today I live alone, without a fixed business, without documents in banks, without a name anywhere. On some days I sell a lot, on others I go through hardship, but at least I can sleep, which before seemed impossible. If I learned something, it's that we don't command others through the force of rituals without destroying our own peace. Choices pursue us even when we try to run away. My only comfort is the idea that I finally found some rest in the calm of the early mornings. I have no plans to return to the town. I keep breathing. For me, that's already good enough. My name is Alina. I'm 74 years old, and I spend my days in a house where I lived with my husband for so long that I can't even say. I always thought loneliness was something we chose, but I ended up realizing that sometimes it just falls in our lap. I lost my son Benjamin when he was 28 years old. It was a blow I never expected, and to this day I carry the weight of it. His wife, who was never rude to me but also wasn't very close, ended up keeping everything, even custody of the child. She moved far away, and since then I haven't had any news of my grandson. My husband Robert died a few years later at 62, victim of a heart attack that caught him by surprise in the early morning. He got up from bed, probably feeling discomfort in his chest, and went to the bathroom. I only realized something was wrong when I heard a noise and ran to see what was happening. That's where I found him, no longer breathing. After that, the house plunged into a silence that frightened me. There was no longer the sound of the television on at night, nor his footsteps in the kitchen, nor that way he had of laughing at simple things. I tried to get used to being without all that, but the truth is I never really could. My mother taught me to make quilts when I was still a child. She sold these pieces in some places, and sometimes I would go along to see how people chose the fabric and appreciated the embroidery. I fell in love with it, and when I became an adult, I continued sewing. It was a hobby that brought me joy, and somehow made me feel part of something bigger. With so many losses, I ended up finding refuge in sewing. Producing each quilt by hand required patience, which helped me keep my head in order. From time to time, people asked for special embroidery or different colors. Some even came to tell me their stories and commissioned gifts for dear relatives. I liked listening because it made me feel useful and close to people, even if just for a few minutes. There was a phase when I trembled so much I couldn't hold the needle. I had panic attacks that left me breathless. Out of nowhere, my chest would lock up, and I needed to drop everything to sit and cry. I think the sum of so many sadnesses collapsed on me. Loneliness was like a dark room from which I couldn't escape. Over time, I learned some tricks to calm myself, but I still go through these episodes from time to time. The problem is that the house that once seemed welcoming became too big for me. The other rooms remain closed. I only enter my bedroom, the kitchen, and a little corner I use for sewing. Benjamin's room remains untouched, and I still smell that familiar scent even knowing it's just something in my head. I didn't have the courage to touch anything in there. Sometimes I stop at the door and remember his laughter, the conversations, even the serious way he would look when he asked me not to neglect myself if something happened to him. When I go out to sell the quilts, people usually treat me with affection. Some even take more pieces than they need just to help me. Sometimes they paid me more, praising my attention to detail. This always gave me the feeling of still having some value. Once I made 17 quilts for a family celebration and took almost a month to finish everything. But I delivered on time and was proud of myself. The story I'm going to tell began after I had been living alone for many years. I can't say exactly the day everything started, but I remember feeling more downcast than usual. Maybe this anguish opened breaches for what would come next. The first strangeness occurred at dawn. I woke up to a sound that seemed like very light footsteps in the hallway. At first, I thought it was something in my head, but I heard it again. I went to check doors and windows, everything locked, no one in sight. I went back to bed trying not to think much, but I didn't sleep a wink until dawn. These noises repeated from time to time, always late at night, always seeming like someone was walking from one side to the other. Once, I decided to sit in the living room waiting to discover where it came from. It was a whole night of vigil, and I heard nothing. There was that uncomfortable silence, as if the house was spying on me. Then something appeared that made me even more tense, a muffled little laugh that came from the backyard. At first, I thought it was some neighbor talking near the fence, but it happened always at the same time of night and sounded strangely mocking. It was soft but awakened a bad feeling, as if the person was having fun at my expense. Sometimes the laughter lasted little, in others it stopped suddenly, leaving me with my heart in my mouth. One day I arrived home at nightfall after selling some pieces and heard the sound of sewing coming from inside, as if someone was pedaling on my machine. I thought it was the wind or some loose object. I opened the door and saw nothing abnormal. The machine was exactly as I had left it, covered and stopped. I stood there trying to understand what I had heard. The house was quiet, almost as if challenging me to enter. When I turned on the light, everything remained motionless. That night, I lost my appetite and went straight to my oratory in the kitchen, where I keep some religious images. I lit some candles, sprinkled holy water on the images, and prayed asking for protection, remembering Saint Michael, Saint Francis, Our Lady, and other names that had accompanied me since I was a girl. I was throwing holy water in the corners, on the windows, on the doors because I was terrified, not knowing how to defend myself. From then on, I started sleeping with a candle lit. Even so, it was difficult to rest. I would close my eyes and have the impression of having someone nearby. At certain moments, I heard even a sigh near the bed, which made me nervous. There was a night when I woke up all sweaty, not knowing what was happening. On one of these occasions, I hadn't been sleeping well for days. I left the lights on, sitting in my rocking chair with a quilt thrown over my legs and a rosary in my hand. The television was off, and the only little noise was from a dim lamp that seemed to buzz. When I got up to go to the bathroom, I felt that quietude bothered me too much. As I passed through the hallway, I glimpsed a person. It was a woman with her back turned, with her hair tied in a bun. She seemed to be trying to open the door to Benjamin's room, fiddling with the handle with disturbing calmness. I stood static for a few moments, imagining it was an intruder or someone who had managed to jump the fence, but I didn't stay quiet. "Get out of here," I said. My voice didn't come out so firm, but I repeated, "Go away." The woman didn't pay the slightest attention, continued in that effort to open the door without turning to me. My whole body trembled, but I went ahead and shouted again. That's when she finally opened the door and entered the room. It wasn't a common walk. It seemed like she was gliding, as if her feet barely touched the ground. She disappeared into the darkness of the room without looking at me even for a second. Full of fear but also anger, I followed to the door to try to drive away whoever it was. When I turned on the light, there was no trace of anyone. The room remained tidy, with the same quilt I had left on the bed. The window was closed with a reinforced grate on the outside that doesn't even move. There was no way to escape through there. I checked all the corners, closet, under the bed, behind the curtains, nothing. Just a heavy and cold air that gave me a strange chill. I was sure that wasn't a common person. It was something that decided to enter my house without being invited. The worst of all was realizing that this thing entered precisely Benjamin's room, as if it knew the meaning of that place for me. A few weeks later, I started feeling like someone was following me on the street. One day I needed to cross town to deliver a quilt to an acquaintance and returned in the late afternoon. The sky was already darkening when I took the path back. I was walking with an empty bag on my shoulder and a quilt around my neck. Suddenly, I had the clear sensation of another person behind me, accompanying my steps with a slight delay. I didn't have the courage to look immediately. I preferred to quicken my pace and get home soon. I thought it was the result of my nervousness, but days later, it happened again. This time, it was already past 8 o'clock at night. I followed down a cobblestone street, and that sensation returned even stronger. It was as if someone was almost touching my shoulder. I tried to pray mentally, but the fear hit stronger. When I finally turned the corner to reach my street, something approached so much that I felt a thud in my chest. That's when I stopped, not knowing what to do. I turned quickly to see if there was someone, and for an instant, I thought I glimpsed a very pale female figure disappearing behind a wall. The street was deserted, but my breathing raced. Shortly after, something more frightening occurred. I was carrying some quilts to deliver when I saw on the other side of the sidewalk a woman standing. She had a face almost without features, as if the skin had no outline of eyes or nose. The only thing you could see was an abnormally wide mouth, half open, but without any sound. It was terrible. When I noticed she was already coming in my direction, I lost my balance and fell to my knees on the ground. The sensation was that faceless face was staring at me. The mouth moved as if it wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to get up, but my legs seemed stuck. Terror took over me. I felt as if I was pushing something that had no weight or form. It was a fight against the air, but in a burst of courage, I managed to break free from that paralysis and ran as fast as I could, dropping my bag and quilts. I only stopped running when my chest burned. Looking back, I saw absolutely nothing. The street was empty, and everything seemed so common that I started to doubt what I had seen. The next day I went back to get my bag, already dirty and wet, but I didn't care. I could only think that there was something after me, and it wasn't from this world. I wasn't one to open up to anyone, but there was a lady named Eunice who lived a few houses from mine. She always offered help, brought cake, asked if I needed anything. One day I broke down and told everything: the footsteps, the laughter, the woman in the hallway, the apparition without a face. She listened to me carefully, but I noticed in her look a mixture of pity and distrust. She gave that sigh people give when they think the person is making things up or exaggerating out of loneliness. Still, she was delicate and didn't criticize me openly. After hearing my reports, she suggested that her daughter Sarah come spend some nights with me to see if I felt safer. Since I couldn't stand the weight of that empty house anymore, I ended up agreeing. Sarah was a 15-year-old girl, quiet but very kind, who liked my quilts and always greeted me politely. She brought a mattress and placed it near my bed. I told her that sometimes I had problems sleeping because of some strange noises, but asked her not to get scared, and that if something happened, just pray. If you hear something strange, try to stay calm, I said. She gave a shy smile and said she would do her best because her mother had already prepared her for eventual oddities. It didn't take long for her to notice herself. One early morning she nudged me while I was dozing. She had wide eyes, saying she heard a sound of laughter coming from outside. I heard it too. It seemed like that same mocking little laugh, very close to the kitchen window. "Should we see what it is, Miss Alina?" she whispered. I signaled for us to stay silent. I tried to reassure her, saying it might be someone on the street. Inside, I was terrified, but I didn't want to pass my fear to her. Sarah's presence ended up bringing a certain relief to the environment. The house seemed less suffocating, with a young voice nearby. Even so, during the first nights of her stay, I woke up several times startled, still feeling distant footsteps or a current of cold air, as if the same energy was lurking. But it didn't take long for these manifestations to lose strength. I started getting up in the morning without that feeling of carrying the world on my shoulders. I continued doing my prayers before sleeping, now with a firmer faith. Sometimes Sarah prayed along, and I felt a strange peace. It was as if something heavy was going away little by little, as I allowed myself to share the fear with another person. That woman I saw in the hallway didn't show her face anymore. The faceless figure also didn't return to torment me. From time to time, the memory came of the sound of those footsteps or the image of that mouth opening, but it was no longer a memory that took the ground from under me. As the days passed, I realized that the fact of not facing everything alone worked like a shield against whatever that was. I kept thinking about why everything had happened. Could it be that my attachment to what I lost opened the doors to these strange things? I started to believe that when we don't say goodbye properly to those who left, we end up accumulating bad energy that can attract presences that shouldn't be here. Today, I see that it's necessary to let those who have already departed find their own path, just as we need to follow ours. I realized that keeping clothes and objects exactly as they were wasn't synonymous with love, but a way of imprisoning myself and maybe even them. Freeing oneself is hard, but it's the only way to ward off what has no place in our world. The relief I felt with Sarah's company made me understand something important. Sometimes what haunts us feeds on our isolation, our refusal to let others into our pain. When I allowed someone else to share that burden, even a young girl who didn't fully understand what was happening, the darkness seemed to lose its power. I learned that holding onto the dead too tightly can sometimes prevent them from resting and prevent us from living. Benjamin's room, which I had kept as a shrine, became just a room again. I finally opened the windows, let the air circulate, and while I kept his things, I stopped treating the space as if he might walk through the door at any moment. The change wasn't immediate, but gradually, the house began to feel like a home again rather than a mausoleum. Sarah stayed with me for almost 2 months, and during that time, I noticed not just the absence of the strange occurrences, but a return of normalcy that I had almost forgotten existed. We would sit together in the evenings. She would help me sort threads and fabrics, and we would talk about simple things, her school, her friends, my memories of happier times. It was during one of these conversations that I realized I hadn't spoken about Benjamin or Robert in a natural way for years. I had either avoided mentioning them entirely or spoke of them with such reverence that they seemed more like saints than the flawed, wonderful men they had been. One evening, as we were finishing a particularly intricate quilt pattern, Sarah asked me about the photographs on the mantelpiece. For the first time since their deaths, I found myself telling stories about Benjamin's terrible cooking attempts and Robert's habit of falling asleep in his chair with his reading glasses askew. We laughed together, and in that laughter I felt something shift, a loosening of the grip I had maintained on my grief. The last strange incident happened about 3 weeks into Sarah's stay. We were both asleep when I woke to the sound of my sewing machine running. But this time, instead of fear, I felt a strange calmness. I got up quietly, not wanting to wake Sarah, and walked to my sewing corner. The machine was indeed running, the needle moving up and down rhythmically, but there was no fabric beneath it. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, I could see the faint outline of someone sitting at the machine, a woman with her hair in a bun, just as I had seen before. But this time she turned to look at me. Her face was clearer now, less shadowy and threatening. She was middle-aged, with tired eyes and calloused hands like mine. She looked at me with what seemed like understanding, perhaps even compassion. Then she stood up, walked to Benjamin's room, and I heard the door close softly. In the morning, I found Benjamin's door slightly ajar, something that hadn't happened in years, since I always kept it firmly shut. Inside, everything was as I had left it, except for one thing. The quilt I had been working on when he died, the one I had abandoned half-finished in my grief, was now completed. The stitching was impeccable, better than anything I could have done, and in the corner was embroidered a small message. For Alina, with love. I never saw the woman again after that night. Sarah left a few days later, promising to visit regularly, and she kept that promise. The house remained peaceful, no longer heavy with unexpressed sorrow and unfinished business. I came to understand that the woman hadn't been malevolent at all. She had been another soul in mourning, perhaps someone who, like me, had lost those she loved and had become trapped in the space between grief and acceptance. In helping me complete what I had left unfinished, she had somehow completed her own journey as well. The quilts I make now have a different quality to them. People often comment that there's something special about them, something that brings comfort. I think it's because I no longer sew with desperate hands trying to hold onto what's gone, but with grateful hands celebrating what was. Benjamin's room is now Sarah's room when she visits, which is often. She's learning to quilt, and her eager questions and small mistakes remind me that life is meant to continue, that love doesn't end with death, but transforms into something new. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear the gentle sound of sewing in the distance, but it no longer frightens me. It sounds like contentment, like work being done with peaceful hands. Whether it's my imagination or something more, I've learned that not all mysterious things are meant to harm us. Sometimes they come to heal, to help us finish what we couldn't complete alone. The loneliness that once felt like a weight pressing down on me has become solitude, a choice rather than a burden. I've learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, and in that knowledge, I've found a peace I thought was lost forever. My quilts still sell well at the local market, and I've even started teaching a few young women in town. Life has a rhythm again, marked not by fear and sorrow, but by the steady sound of needles through fabric, the soft murmur of conversation, and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from separate pieces. The woman who visited me taught me that sometimes what we fear most is not something external, but our own inability to let go, to move forward, to allow ourselves to heal. She was a mirror of my own trapped spirit, and in helping her find peace, I found my own. My sister was subscribed to a website where parties in the suburbs were announced. Back then, we lived near the university district. I was 22 and went out every weekend with my friends and my sister's friends. I don't know when they all met, but all my friends were dating all my sister's friends. So we were always together and always went to those parties. You could call them underground, but honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal. They played music, sold drinks, had ridiculous contests, raffled off bottles. You can imagine. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but at that moment, it was everything we needed. Since nobody had a car, it was always the same thing. Finding someone to convince, who lived closer, who would risk it with taxis, or if we just weren't going to go. Sometimes we ended up sleeping wherever we could. One day, Jake's dad went on vacation and left his pickup truck at the house. Obviously, he hid the keys, but my friend found them. That was the time we decided to go to a party in the mountains. There were 10 of us. It was a pickup with an adapted bed in the back. 7 of us fit back there without problem. My sister and Jake's girlfriend went up front with him. The rest of us went in the back among backpacks, jackets, and bottles wrapped in towels so they wouldn't make noise. Today, years later, I recognize all the implications of the decisions we made that night. But back then, my mind always told me that nothing bad was going to happen. Until it did. The arrival to the mountains was normal. 3 hours without problem. Humid heat, loud music, laughter. The party was good until Leslie got a call from her mom saying her grandmother had gotten sick, that they were at the hospital, that she should come back. Jake's girlfriend wanted to leave immediately. Not very willingly, but Jake was going to drive her in the truck. She grabbed her things and started saying goodbye to everyone. I remember that just at that moment, the party was starting to get better, but I didn't have a way to get back. I didn't have more money. My sister barely had like $70, and I hadn't even told my parents I was going out, much less that I was in another state. My sister wanted to stay, but we had an agreement, right? We went together, and we came back together. Her boyfriend was staying, so that's why she was upset too. Erica and David also came back. There were 6 of us. Me in the back, frustrated, but making an effort not to think silly things. I tried to calm down. I repeated to myself that if it had been my family, I would have come back too. We left the neighborhood and took the highway. After a while, through the little window that connected the bed with the cabin, Jake told us we were going to take the free highway. He said it was because he didn't feel in condition to take the toll road. And honestly, I wasn't in any condition to offer to drive either. I was worse off drunk, and none of the others knew how to drive. Even so, I suggested we ask Leslie to take a taxi alone, but there was an uncomfortable silence. She probably took it personally and thought I wanted to leave her stranded. The thing is, Jake took the road and stepped on it. We were going over 75 miles per hour. About 20 minutes later, a car caught up to us. We all noticed it because it was flashing its lights. The worst part was that instead of letting it pass, Jake accelerated more. I already had my heart in my throat. The others acted like nothing was wrong, trusting blindly that my friend had everything under control. The car pulled alongside us. It flashed its lights again, and then the siren sounded. At that moment, I thought the best thing that could happen was happening, because it was just starting to rain hard, and at the speed we were going, an accident was right there, grazing us. How wrong I was. We had to pull over. Those of us in the back didn't even stick our heads out. The first thing the officer asked my friend was if he had been drinking and driving. It was obvious, but he still asked to see what he had to say. He asked for the car papers. I heard Leslie telling him we were in a hurry because of her grandmother. The guy responded that he was very sorry, but it was going to be very difficult to let us go. Up to that point, he didn't know that several of us were coming in the back. That information, when it came out, was going to complicate everything. Then Jake, not at all discreet, opened the window and asked us if we had money to offer the cop. You know what he achieved with that? He got the officer to force him to get out, hand over the keys, and open the bed. I was thinking if the rain gets heavier, maybe we can run away. Maybe that will make him give up. It was an idiotic thought, but it was all I had left. We were all in trouble, but Jake was the one most screwed. No license, no permission from his parents, driving badly, with 3 people in the bed. The guy put my sister and Leslie in the patrol car and told Jake to follow him. What if we escape? Jake said, trying to sound funny. I punched him in the face. Are you going to leave my sister there? We followed the patrol car for about 15 minutes on the free highway. Then it turned onto a dirt road. If it weren't for the lights, we wouldn't have seen anything. The road was black, full of deep puddles, ups and downs without any signs, without anything around. It was like 40 minutes like that, and we weren't going to the impound lot or the station or any official place. That was very clear. When we finally arrived, my sister got out of the patrol car saying that Leslie had gotten rude, and that's why they were going to arrest us. It was then that everything hit me at once. That guy wasn't a cop. The patrol car wasn't a patrol car. It was a regular car with an improvised light bar on the roof, and the guy wasn't wearing a badge or uniform, just a dark shirt and a gun in his hand. He fired into the air to make it clear. In front of us was an abandoned construction, a brick shell without windows or doors. That's where he had brought us. I think we were all crying except Jake, who in a moment of carelessness tried to flee. He didn't get far, about 100 feet. He got tangled in a barbed wire that wasn't visible in the darkness. He fell face first to the ground. It sounded dry. We had to drag him back, all under the rain, and there we were. Soaked, freezing, and with an armed guy telling us at gunpoint to go get our friend. The place where they stopped us, or rather kidnapped us, was effectively a jail, but an abandoned jail. Minimal, without any trace of legal functioning. Barely 3 cells with rusty bars that creaked with every gust of wind. Everything smelled like old rust, rancid humidity, dried urine, and walls that had rotted from the inside. The floor was stained with mud and something darker that we didn't want to identify. The air was dense, as if it hadn't been ventilated in years. The light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling that swayed from the currents that seeped through the holes in the walls. It was cold, not climate cold, cursed place cold. They put us all in one cell, and Jake they threw in another. He was still half unconscious. He didn't even know where he was. They threw him there like he was a sack of wet clothes. Leslie lost her mind. She screamed at the fake cop that she hoped his grandmother would die, that we were going to sue him, that he didn't know who he was messing with. Stupid things, but with a rage that made her tremble. I just wanted her to shut up, because at that moment, it wasn't clear if they were going to leave us alive. The guy didn't say anything. He closed the bars with a loud bang, closed the main door, got in his car, and left. We were silent for a few seconds. Then we all started screaming. We all screamed as if that would help anything, as if someone was going to pass by that forgotten construction and decide to help us. We were like that for I don't know how long. Half an hour. Erica and David cried nonstop. Long sobs, chest tremors. They had trouble breathing. Nobody said anything useful. Just that this couldn't be happening, that everything was going to be okay. Pure lies. 2 hours passed. Outside it kept raining. A constant, stubborn rain that sounded like a movie soundtrack. Inside, nobody was talking anymore. And then a voice was heard. Jake's. He was lying face down, barely regaining consciousness. He spoke with difficulty, but his voice was very clear. Don't look toward the cell across from you. Don't look at him, but there's someone there watching us. We froze. Nobody said anything, but we did exactly the opposite of what he told us. All 5 of us looked up at the same time. And yes, there he was. A figure leaning against the wall of the cell across from us. He didn't move, he just watched. The light didn't hit him directly, but you could make out his eyes. They didn't shine, didn't blink. They were dark, empty, fixed. The face seemed human, but not completely. It was too elongated, too still. You couldn't tell if he was breathing. He didn't say anything. You couldn't tell if he was alive or if he had simply been there for years. I felt something sink into my stomach, as if they had poured ice water inside me. We didn't know if he was a person, an apparition, or something else, but he was watching us. The guy didn't speak or move. Jake was still lying on the ground face down, with his head to one side, passed out, and yet he was the one talking. He told us that the guy, the one in the other cell, had told him everything, that they had just left us there to die, that unless we managed to tear off the bars or kick down the doors, nobody would know about us for the next 3 years. We would die of hunger or desperation, that they had left him there too, that he had been locked up for 3 years. We didn't know if it was one of Jake's jokes, but it didn't sound like one unless at that moment. Besides, there really was that other guy. We could see him for real. There was someone there. The man stood up. We all backed away at the same time. He walked toward the bars and spoke. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time. He told us that Jake was lying. That yes, he had told him everything, but with a difference. He said we weren't going to die of hunger, that the supposed cop was going to come back, that he was going to come back for the women first, that we would never see them again, and then it would be our turn. Unless he fell silent. He looked like a statue, another part of that humid, rotten jail. Unless someone stays to take his place, he finally said. And by that he didn't mean punishment, not staying locked up. He meant dying or killing. He looked at all of us and said, "If you want, it can be him. It was his fault. He brought you all here." We all understood. He was referring to Jake. Unexpectedly, Leslie said yes. Nobody else said anything. The man stepped back, disappeared for a moment in the shadow, then returned wielding a weapon. He stuck it through the bars, stretched his arm as far as he could, and fired. I never heard the bars open, but from one moment to the next, they were already open. Jake's too, the man's wasn't. I didn't go near to see my friend, fearing the bars would close behind me. I didn't dare touch him. I only saw how a red puddle began to form under his body. We left just like that, out of nowhere. So easy it seemed like a bad dream, but it wasn't. One of our friends died in front of us, and I don't know how Leslie is going to carry that burden. She was the one who said yes. We hid among the trees until dawn. Then a while longer, until we understood that nobody was going to come for us. Jake's dad's truck stayed there. Nobody dared go back to look for the keys in the dead man's pockets. When we got to the highway, Leslie left. The thing about her grandmother was priority one, and even though her boyfriend was no longer with us, she got in a taxi and disappeared. We went home without knowing what to do. Should we tell the police something? Jake's dad. That man was still on vacation. Even so, the authorities forced us to take them to the place. All the way to the end of the road, to that construction. When we got to the site, we were about to enter, but they took us out almost immediately. The smell was unbearable. There was a body, just one, and it wasn't Jake, his blood was there. The puddle, the trail, but there was no body. The one that was there was the man from the cell. The one who talked to us, the one who let us out. His corpse was in a very advanced state of decomposition. Just by seeing it, they said he had been dead for years, that it was impossible for him to have done anything. There was no trace of Jake. What he lost of blood, they said, wasn't enough to have died. Not there, not like that. Since then, he's been missing, and we stopped going to those parties. At least my sister and I were grounded for a full year. But the story doesn't end there. 6 months after that night, I started getting calls, always at 3 in the morning, always during storms. The first time I thought it was a prank. Heavy breathing, static, then a voice I almost recognized asking, "Why did you leave me?" I hung up immediately, but my hands were shaking. The voice sounded like Jake, but wrong somehow. Distorted, like it was coming from underwater. The calls continued for months. Always the same time, always during bad weather. Sometimes it was just breathing. Sometimes there were other sounds in the background, metal scraping against metal, water dripping, something that might have been crying. My sister started getting them too. So did Erica and David. We compared notes once, the only time we all got together after the incident. We realized the calls were following a pattern. They started with whoever was furthest from the old jail and worked their way geographically closer. Leslie was first. She'd moved to Phoenix by then, trying to forget. But she told us, in a shaky voice over video chat, that Jake had been calling her for weeks before the rest of us started getting them. "He asks me why I said yes," she whispered, and we could see she hadn't been sleeping. "He asks me over and over why I said yes, and I don't know what to tell him because I don't remember making that choice." It was like someone else was speaking through my mouth. David was next, then Erica, then my sister. I was last, probably because I lived closest to the mountains where it all happened. The calls got more detailed as time went on. Jake, or whatever was using his voice, started describing where he was. A place that sounded like the jail but different, bigger, with more cells, more people. "There are so many of us here," he said during one call. People who made the same choice Leslie made. People who pointed fingers when they should have stayed quiet. "The man who shot me, he's here too, been here longer than anyone. He tells us stories about the living, about who's next." I changed my number 3 times. It didn't matter. He always found me. The worst call came exactly 1 year after the incident. This time, it wasn't just Jake's voice. There were others in the background, a chorus of whispers asking the same questions. "Why did you leave us? When are you coming back? Do you remember what you promised?" But I never promised anything. None of us did. That's when I understood. The man in the cell, the one who helped us escape, he hadn't been helping us at all. He'd been recruiting us. Every person who walked out of that place alive became connected to it somehow, tethered to whatever evil lived there. We were supposed to bring others back. That was the real deal. That was why the bars opened so easily, why escape seemed so simple. I moved to Oregon after that, got a job at a lumber mill, tried to start over. The calls followed me there too, but less frequently. Maybe the distance helped, or maybe whatever was calling was getting weaker. But I learned something important. It only happens when it rains. So I check the weather obsessively now. When storms are coming, I make sure I'm never alone. I stay in public places, surrounded by noise and light and living people. Because the last thing Jake told me, during what I hope was our final conversation, was this: I'm not the only one who got left behind that night, and we're all getting hungry. The rain is starting now as I finish this story. I can hear it beginning to drum against my apartment windows. My phone is sitting on the kitchen counter, and I keep glancing at it, waiting. 3 a.m. is still 2 hours away, but I'm already getting ready to leave. There's a 24-hour diner across town where I'll spend the night drinking coffee and pretending to read a book. Because the one thing I've learned in all these years, is that some promises get made in your silence, and some debts get paid whether you remember agreeing to them or not. And I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, the only way to stop running from what happened in that jail is to go back and finish what we started. But not tonight. Tonight I'll just drive through the rain and try to forget the sound of my friend's voice asking me why I left him behind. The phone is ringing now. I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to grab my keys, get in my car, and drive until the storm passes. I just hope the diner is still open. I hope there are still places where the dead can't follow. I hope I'm wrong about all of this. But the rain keeps falling, and the phone keeps ringing, and somewhere in the mountains, I think Jake is still waiting for us to come back. My name is Veronica, and I grew up on a small farm nestled between rolling hills in rural Kentucky, where every day began before the sun truly rose. When I was young, my family lived without electricity, without running water, and certainly without an indoor bathroom like people have nowadays. For drinking, cooking, and washing, we depended on a makeshift well in the backyard. Behind the farm, my father had dug a hole covered with some wooden planks, and that's where we took care of our needs. Everything was simple, but I didn't think it was bad because it was the only reality I knew. My mother, Miss Conception, was always a firm woman who spoke harshly and didn't accept much questioning. Being the eldest daughter, I helped with everything I could. She would say that a woman needed to master household chores while the men took care of the fields and animals. That's how things worked there. Although I loved being outdoors, they never invited me to accompany my father and my brothers. It wasn't forbidden, but they didn't give me space either. It always bothered me to feel like I was trapped in the kitchen. My younger sister, Juliana, seemed to adapt well. She stayed close to our mother, learning to cook and mend clothes. But I loved running with the dogs and walking barefoot on the damp earth. When they weren't watching, I would venture near the cornfield, enter the low woods, observe the plants, and lose track of time. Once, when I was still a little girl, I ran after a colorful bird that perched on a branch. I didn't notice I had gone too far and got lost. I panicked when I realized I didn't recognize the way back. I screamed and cried, but only after a long time did my father appear to rescue me. That night, my mother gave me a huge scolding, swearing that if I got lost again, no one would bother looking for me. She spoke of wild animals, of men who passed through there and could take children. That sermon was so harsh that I still feel a tightness in my chest when I remember it. Life there was very closed off. Almost everything we knew came from our own work. I saw my uncles from time to time, but they lived far away, and the walk there was tiring. Sometimes the family would go in a line, carrying baskets and bags along the dirt trail. My father and mother would ride mules to the small store in the settlement when they needed salt, flour, or kerosene. On these occasions, they rarely took me. They usually called one of my brothers, and I stayed behind taking care of the house with Juliana. She was calmer, but I would get anxious when night came. I heard creaking in the roof, barking in the yard, noises that made my imagination run wild. We were 5 in total, 3 boys and 2 girls. My father always said that the heavy work was left to the men, but the foundation of the farm was in the women. I didn't understand much, but it seemed that being a woman meant tolerating everything in silence. But I had a desire to explore and rebel against that tied-down routine. Even as a child, I felt an agony of being trapped washing and cooking. I preferred to feel the sun on my face, smell the earth. From time to time, I would escape without anyone seeing and pay dearly when I returned. I would get scolded, but for me, it was the only way to breathe. There was no radio or television, so we entertained ourselves with stories told by lamplight. My grandmother, when she came to visit us, would say that not everything that moved around there was an animal or person. She said that certain presences roamed the woods, and that it was better not to invoke what couldn't be understood. I remembered this for many years. My father also warned me not to walk alone. He didn't yell like my mother, but he spoke to me seriously. He told me that there were beings that wandered the surroundings. He spoke of prayers and amulets that should protect us when someone felt something strange. He said that if one of these creatures crossed our path, and we looked directly into its eyes, disaster could happen. Some legends spoke of witches who turned into animals, others of spirits that inhabited the closed woods. He spoke of one in particular that appeared as a tall man with grayish skin, who sucked the energy from anyone who passed alone through there. I was terrified when I heard these stories, but even so, after a few days, I would find myself again in the middle of the woods. It seemed that my curiosity spoke louder. Sometimes I found a flower with a different smell or a shiny stone, and this enchanted me. It was as if the beauty of nature overcame my fear. There was a particular flower that attracted me, but it was hard to find. My mother called it Gentle Night, with small white petals that exhaled perfume at the end of the day. I would squeeze between the densest bushes looking for it. If I managed to bring a flower into the house, I would at least get a less harsh look. Despite the warnings, I continued exploring. I felt that there I was freer, could be the owner of my steps. It might have been a rebellious phase, but I liked feeling in control of my movements. My older brother Caleb lived worried. He came home one day with a downcast face, saying he had seen a strange boy by the creek, alone where the current was strong. Caleb said that boy seemed younger, but was standing in a stretch where the water only hit his shin, which was impossible for a child of that size. He also had dark spots on his arms and back. Even so, the boy laughed as if he were in a harmless game. This left my brother so disturbed that he spent the rest of the day quiet. Caleb was the strongest among us, always brave, but he didn't want to return to the river for a few days. He warned that something was strange there, and it was better to avoid that part. I was scared to see him so serious. That night, I barely slept. While everyone fell asleep early to wake up the next day, I just thought about that boy's laughter. Even though I hadn't seen anything, my imagination painted 1,000 scenarios in my head. I stayed trembling all night, listening to every noise of the wind outside. 3 years after that story, I still walked alone when I could. It was on one of those walks that something began. I was relatively close to home, following a trail that descended to an orange grove when I noticed someone crouched ahead. It was a young man messing with something on the ground. I didn't hear his steps. He seemed alone, wearing worn clothes and a straw hat. The way he was bent made me strangely uncomfortable. It seemed not to match the environment, as if he were part of another story. I tried to walk straight past, but he greeted me. "Good morning." His voice was calm, and he asked if I could help him set up a bird trap. I hesitated but ended up stopping. He showed me some interwoven twigs held by thick string. He said that by putting breadcrumbs, he could capture small birds. I had never seen something like that up close, so I crouched down to look more closely. He seemed calm, but I felt somewhat uncomfortable. His smell was a mixture of sweat from someone who had walked a lot under the sun, with a strange touch that reminded me of something burned. I tried not to stare for too long, but I noticed he had light skin, almost without marks. The beard and face of someone who didn't match the place. I stayed quiet, tying the string where he asked. He told me his name was Darius, without giving a last name. He said his parents had land on the other side of the hill. I had never heard of people living on the other side, but I didn't ask much. Some part of me wanted to believe. When we finished, he thanked me and I continued on my way, still thinking about what had happened. I didn't tell anyone. I thought if I spoke, my mother and brothers would keep saying I was making things up. I preferred to keep everything to myself. A few weeks later, I saw Darius again. He wore the same clothes, the same hat, as if not a single day had passed. It was in the deepest part of the river, where the water runs cold. I was alone looking for pebbles to throw in the water and make them skip on the surface. He emerged from some bushes and asked if I had seen a black dog that was his. He said the animal had run away and he was looking for it. I said I hadn't seen any dog for days. He shook his head and approached a little, looking at the riverbank. This time I noticed something different. The eyes that before seemed brown were now almost green. I wondered if I had noticed wrong before, but that bothered me. He asked for my help to look for the dog, and I, somewhat embarrassed, accepted. We went up a path full of weeds, slippery stones, and ancient trees. During the walk, he said I was pretty, that my braids were well done, and that he saw me always walking alone. Then he commented that he heard my mother complaining to me sometimes. He said that in his house, daughters could walk wherever they wanted without someone on their back. I can't explain, but that touched my pride. I always thought things were the same everywhere, that working from an early age and getting scolded was normal. He planted a seed in my head. Maybe my family wasn't so good to me after all. I got distracted and realized we had ventured into a part of the woods I didn't recognize. I said I wanted to go back, and he turned his face with an expression I didn't quite understand. We continued in silence for a moment until he shrugged and started moving away. I decided to go back alone. It took me a while to find the direction home. I walked trying to remember the bigger trees and the position of the sun. When I finally saw the roof down there, I felt relief mixed with strangeness. What had that been? Did he really live on the other side, or was he just making it up? In the following days, I didn't see Darius anywhere, but I noticed there were several traps like the one he showed me in different places. Some were broken. Others didn't even seem to have been checked. I felt a strange desire to follow them, as if they were clues left by him. I thought about him a lot without understanding why. Maybe it was the way he talked to me, complimenting me, making me question the life I led. Sometimes I caught myself lost in thoughts, wondering if I should tell Juliana everything, but I gave up so as not to create confusion. I asked Caleb if he knew anyone living on the other side of the hill. He just replied that it was impossible because there was a lot of closed forest there. We had even lost a calf that ran in that direction and never found a trace again. Still, I couldn't get Darius out of my head. I wanted to see him again no more. It bothered me because I also felt fear. It was something dubious. Half of me wanted to stay away, the other half wanted answers. I started observing every corner when I went out to get firewood or fetch water. Traps appeared in different places, and I would stop to see if he would show up. Nothing, but I felt as if I were being followed, a silent presence that hovered. It was a mix of curiosity and agony. Over time, I became tense without knowing how to deal with my own feelings. I tried to hide it, but my mother noticed I was more distracted. She gave me more and more tasks, and I did everything gritting my teeth without complaining, but my head was elsewhere. And then what I feared happened. One late afternoon, my mother called my attention in front of my brothers, saying I did everything reluctantly, that I was nothing but an ungrateful girl. With anger stuck in my throat, I ended up responding. It was the first time I raised my voice. She came at me, grabbed my arm, and started shaking me, yelling. At that moment, I didn't want to stay there even one more second. I broke free and ran out the door without caring where I was going. I ran into the woods, ignoring branches that scratched me. The sky was already darkening, and I just wanted to disappear. That's when I heard a voice calling me. It was him, Darius, emerging from behind a tree. He spoke as if he was already expecting me. "You don't have to go through this anymore. At my house, it's different. You'll have peace." I didn't think about anything. I had a face wet with tears and a revolt that burned in my chest. He asked me to accompany him to the supposed farm on the other side, just to calm me down. I don't know why I accepted so quickly, but I clung to that idea of freedom. We walked aimlessly, stepping on dry leaves and fallen branches. He told me things that made me even angrier with my family. He said they didn't value me, that they saw me as a servant. This filled me with resentment, and each step I took moved me further away from home. But suddenly I heard strange noises behind us, as if something heavy was moving through the vegetation. I turned to look and didn't see anyone, but my heart raced. I said I wanted to go back, but Darius pretended not to hear. I continued following because I was confused and didn't want to be alone in that dark forest. He walked faster and faster, as if he knew exactly where to go. We reached a point where the trees were so thick that almost no light passed through. I stopped and said I was serious, that I was scared. Then he turned with a hard expression, almost irritation, and said we were already close. I felt a shiver I can't explain. That's when I noticed something on his neck, a large dark mark that wasn't there before. I looked more attentively and realized that the color of his eyes seemed to change in the minimum reflection of clarity. His breathing sounded heavy. My intuition screamed to turn around. I tried to let go of his hand, but he squeezed my fingers hard. It was as if he had stopped being that calm young man and turned into something else. I pulled and managed to move away a few steps. Darius then gave a smile that didn't match his face. It was a pale smile without emotion. He called my name with a strangely hoarse voice. He spoke in a way that froze me. He said it wasn't worth fighting against that. In a few seconds, he advanced and grabbed my arm. I tried to scream, but my throat seemed closed. He pulled me, and I stumbled on branches, falling and scratching myself all over. With each pull, I felt sharp pain in my shoulder, as if it were going to dislocate. I grabbed onto a tree trunk, trying to resist. His hands were cold, almost wet, and there was a sour smell that turned my stomach. I cried and tried to use my feet to plant them on the ground, but it seemed in vain. While this was happening, a strange noise came from behind the bushes. It sounded like a deep growl, as if something big was lurking. I couldn't see what it was, just felt the vibration. Fear took over me in a way I had never felt before. I prayed mentally, asking God to get me out of there. The young man, or whatever he was, pulled my hair trying to drag me. I heard his breathing in my ear, so strong it seemed like a panting animal. I felt my arms and legs weakening. In an act of desperation, I hugged the tree with all the strength I had left. He started cursing under his breath, as if he couldn't get me loose. And then that thing behind the bushes appeared closer. I didn't see clearly, but I felt the enormous presence. I heard branches breaking. It was as if Darius had heard it too, because he let go of my waist and turned his face, attentive to this new threat. I took the opportunity to break free completely and ran limping. In my desperation, I tripped on something that cut my leg. I almost fainted from pain, but got up with tears in my eyes and ran without thinking about anything else, opening the way through the branches. I felt his steps behind me. I sobbed, couldn't even breathe properly. It seemed like my whole body was being torn apart. At a certain point, I tripped again and rolled down a slope. I scraped myself all over, hit my back on a rock. I thought I was going to die there. When I stopped rolling, I heard a scream that echoed through the woods. It sounded like an animal but came from Darius's throat. It was terrifying. I trembled all over but dragged myself to a tree. I tried to stand up, but my ankle throbbed. I don't know how long I stayed there crying. The noise suddenly disappeared, as if everything around had gone silent. I was left without strength, without breath. I felt something moving in my hair, but I was too stunned to react. I fainted. I only remember the weight of my body and that unbearable pain in my foot. Everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in my bed inside the house, but all bandaged and sore. My mother was passing a damp cloth on my forehead. She asked what had happened. I cried without being able to explain. When I tried to talk about Darius, about the way he transformed, my mother kept looking at me without understanding. She said Caleb found me fallen on the slope, unconscious, and brought me back. My mother repeated that I was full of bruises, that she had no idea how I had hurt myself so much. She thought I had fallen down the hillside, and that was it. She said it was dangerous for me to keep walking alone, that this should serve as a lesson. There's no farm on the other side, Veronica. We know it's just closed forest, she insisted. I just shook my head crying. I tried to argue, but she said it wasn't time to fantasize. I spent that night between fever and confused nightmares. I woke up startled, seeing shadows in the corner of the room. My father came in at dawn to see me. He made it clear he was worried, but didn't know what to do other than pray. Over the days, I tried to tell again what I saw, but my mother changed the subject, saying I needed to heal and stop imagining things. I felt a mixture of frustration and fear. I knew someone or something tried to take me. As if that wasn't enough, I started having repeated fevers. My body became heavy. I sweated cold and cried while sleeping. My mother said I thrashed around, screamed, sometimes said strange phrases. I didn't remember anything when I woke up. Every night was torment. I closed my eyes and saw Darius's face close to mine. I felt that burned smell. I had the feeling he could appear again at any moment, emerging from nowhere. At a certain point, my brothers started looking at me with fear. They said I seemed like another person, that sometimes I talked to myself or laughed in a way they didn't recognize. I denied it, but I didn't remember what I did or said during the episodes. My father and mother became scared. She even asked me if I was making up those things to get attention. But then she realized I didn't even have the strength to get out of bed alone. I felt exhausted, without energy. From time to time, I felt as if there was someone in the room with me, even with my eyes closed. My breathing became heavy, and I sweated with nerves. I was afraid to tell and be called crazy. I spent hours praying for that to go away. The pain in my foot and back was improving gradually, but the pain in my soul only increased. I dreamed that Darius watched me through the window crack, waiting to pull me back to the woods. I woke up screaming, soaked in sweat. My mother started sleeping next to me to hold me during nightmares. I woke up confused, sometimes thrashing. She said she couldn't stand seeing me suffer anymore. She said God would help me, but it was hard to believe. One night I had an attack worse than all the others. I got up from bed screaming, ran to the door as if I wanted to escape. My mother tried to hold me, and I pushed her. We both fell to the floor. I thrashed, cried, didn't even know what I was doing. My father came running in and immobilized me with force. I cursed, kicked, scratched as if I were another person. He carried me outside the house, saying he wouldn't leave me in that state locked up inside. We stumbled on stones and roots on the way, but he didn't stop. He held me against his chest, and I writhed. The lanterns outside barely lit the trail to the river, but even so, he continued determined. When we got to the water, he entered without taking off his clothes, still holding me. In that desperation, I felt the shock of the cold water invading me. It was as if my mind disconnected for an instant. The feeling of suffocation took over. I don't remember much, just the cold and sudden darkness. After that, I blacked out. My mother said my father kept yelling for me to wake up, shaking me inside the water. I was pale with rolled back eyes. They took me back home and put me on the mattress. I spent days without talking, without reacting. The fevers came and went, and I could barely eat. My mother believed that something beyond physical illness was attacking me. She spoke of what my grandmother always said: there are things in the world that can't be explained. My father, who was always quieter, prayed by my side. He confessed he had never seen anything like it in his life. He said that if it were a disease, I would have gotten better or worse in a normal way. But what happened to me seemed to escape logic. I kept alternating between episodes and moments of total apathy. Sometimes I tried to run out of the room, breaking things along the way. Other times I stayed motionless, staring at the wall. My family didn't know what to do. They ended up tying me to the bed with cloths and ropes, but I thrashed so much that I managed to get loose. I fell face first on the floor, hurting my face. My father decided we couldn't continue like this. He didn't want to treat me like a trapped animal. They put me sitting under a tree in the yard, tied lightly just so I wouldn't run away. I cried nonstop, but also couldn't explain what I felt. It was as if anger and fear were destroying me from within. My mother tried to talk to a neighbor who suggested they take me to the settlement where an old woman lived who understood stronger prayers. They made a small trip with me by cart there. I was delirious, talking about disconnected things. We ended up at Aunt Lucy's house, my mother's sister. She lived next to a chapel and was known for being very religious. As soon as we arrived, she looked at me with compassion, saying it was necessary to seek divine help. She asked the local priest to pray for me. He saw me in that state, thin, dejected, with deep dark circles. He talked to my mother but didn't quite understand what was happening. Even so, he agreed to try to bless me. I practically didn't speak. I sat in the corner of Aunt Lucy's room, staring into space. When someone tried to talk to me, I had difficulty responding. It was as if my mind was elsewhere. The priest started praying with me every day, using a small crucifix and holy water. Sometimes I had crises during prayer. I screamed, contorted, but he continued firm, asking me to have faith. My aunt and mother lit candles and prayed the rosary by my side. My father, although more reserved, passed by there to see if I was improving. I heard the prayers like a distant echo without knowing exactly what to think. The weeks passed, and little by little, I returned to myself. I started eating better, responding when they called me. My mother cried with joy, saying it was a miracle. I still felt a weight in my chest, but I could already talk. My body still hurt. I had scratch marks on my arms, cuts on my legs, and each stain reminded me of what I had lived through. Even without understanding rationally, I felt I had escaped something terrible. People asked if I remembered what I did during the crises. I shook my head, denying. It was as if another person took my place. I only remembered fragment screams, the feeling of being cornered. My mother hugged me, asking for forgiveness for being so hard on me. She said she understood my revolt, but never imagined things would reach that point. The priest advised the family to have more patience and dialogue. I didn't return to the farm immediately. I stayed a few weeks at Aunt Lucy's house to rest. I started sleeping a little better, despite still waking up scared sometimes, dreaming that Darius was spying on me from some corner. There, the routine was calmer. I did small tasks to distract myself, like organizing the kitchen or sweeping the yard. The priest appeared from time to pray, reminding me to keep faith even though I was still afraid. Going back to the farm was difficult. I knew I would have to face the place where everything happened. My family came to get me with the care of someone carrying fragile china. On the way, I looked at the woods and felt chills. When I arrived, my father had already built a small new room for me where I could stay with more privacy. My mother tried not to argue, talked more gently. It was as if they wanted to protect me from myself. The first days were strange. I woke up during the night crying, certain that Darius was outside, but I found only darkness and silence. I covered myself up to my head, begging for it to be just paranoia. My brothers returned to the routine of taking care of the crops, and I tried to help with light tasks. The pain in my ankle still bothered me, but I was moving around carefully. Even so, every time I passed near the slope, I remembered the day I almost died there. My mother became more understanding when she saw me sad. She would sit next to me and stay silent, giving me time. I think she realized how difficult our relationship had been. I also felt I needed to forgive. On some nights, I had the feeling of suffocating, as if I had swallowed water again, but I calmed myself by praying quietly. My father appeared with a little lantern if he heard my crying. He would hug me and say everything was fine, that no one would hurt me anymore. That's how I resumed life, although I was never the same again. Sometimes I still heard noises in the woods and remembered Darius, but I wasn't sure if that was fear or something real. I preferred not to risk it. Time passed and I stopped being just the curious girl. I grew up and married, had 2 children, left the farm to live in a less isolated place. But I never forgot what I went through. From time to time, I remember the feeling of being dragged. The strangest part is that even as an adult, sometimes I feel he hasn't gone away. I go to hang clothes on the line, feel a chill, and look around. Nothing. But something tells me that presence stuck to me somehow. Trying to overcome it, I looked for healers and blessing women who used herbs, fumigations, strong prayers. Some said I needed to heal my anger because that's what the creature fed on. Others spoke of cutting the bond with that spirit. The truth is that over time, things got better. I don't have attacks like before. I just carry the memories and occasional disturbing dreams. I learned not to ignore my instinct when I sense danger. My mother and father also matured after everything. Sometimes she tells me she would like to go back to the past and listen to me more, give me more freedom, understand me. I reply that we can't change what was, but we can live differently now. My brother Caleb rarely talks about what he saw in that river, but he confesses that after rescuing me, he spent a long time without approaching the water. He said he even noticed small footprints on the bank, but didn't want to investigate. I never saw Darius again for real, but I've dreamed about him. Sometimes he appears in my dream as a simple young man in a hat, calling me to follow a path in the woods. I wake up sweating with my heart racing, but now I know it was just a memory. No one explains exactly what happened to me. Some believe it was an episode due to trauma. Others say something supernatural deceived me when I was vulnerable. I don't know which answer is right. I only know that the fear I felt was real, as were the marks on my body. And somehow, I came out of that more aware of who I am. I understood that sometimes we revolt not only because of the life we have, but because of the lack of voice we feel. Today, I maintain always greater care with my children. I don't forbid them from playing, but I guide them to be attentive, to know the limits. I tell some stories so they value life, but I avoid saying all the details of what I lived through. My father, before dying, called me for a conversation. He said he regretted the day he saw me leaving the house in tears and didn't run after me immediately. He said he feels guilty, but I forgave him because I know he didn't understand my way. Life goes on, but the memory of what I went through on the farm never went away. When the night is very silent, I feel my heart accelerate and close my eyes tightly, asking that no ghost returns to haunt me. The most painful part is remembering how I trusted Darius. He seemed sincere, made me believe I would find freedom by his side. Today, I see that not everything that appears with a beautiful face is human, and that loneliness can make us easy prey. I still wonder if he was really a person, an entity, or something invented by my head. Whatever it was, the risk I ran was real, and the wounds took time to heal. There are nights when I still wake up crying. My mother used to say, "When we're confused, any gentle voice can sound like hope." And that's exactly what happened. I was needy for affection and attention, and he presented himself with the right words to lead me. That's why I warn anyone who listens to my account, be careful not to underestimate your own feelings. Sometimes, our internal weakness attracts things that take advantage of us. We need to be firm even when life seems unfair. If I hadn't had so much anger inside me, maybe I wouldn't have trusted so quickly in a stranger. But there's no point in lamenting. The past doesn't change. The most we can do is learn and not let evil grab us again. After I married, I improved a lot, but I still sought help from a healer when I moved. She said I carried an old bond with a shadow that tried to dominate me. I prayed for many weeks asking for liberation. Even so, from time to time, I feel that stab of fear in my chest. I move forward, but I don't ignore what I lived through. It was an episode that made me see the strength I have, and also the fragility of human beings in the face of the unknown. In the place where I currently live, sometimes people tell stories of appearances of strange lights in the sugarcane fields. I listen, but keep my experience to myself. I don't want to be a reason for mockery or astonishment. I learned that silence can be a shield, but it can also be a prison. In my case, telling what I went through relieves the weight. That's why today I decided to speak to whoever wants to listen. There are moments in life when danger doesn't show itself as a monster, but as a gentle face. I don't pretend to prove anything. I just share because if there's someone living a similar situation, maybe they'll find strength to react. Not always does the one who harms us arrive aggressively. Sometimes they arrive with a smile and promises. I still carry some physical and emotional scars, but I learned to take care of myself, to defend my freedom without falling into traps of those who offer an easy way out. And I also got closer to my family. Today, I understand they were also victims of their own limitations. Even though I don't see Darius anymore, it's as if part of him stayed stuck in memory. I close my eyes and can hear that gentle voice calling me. But when I think about what happened, I feel I survived by a thread and am grateful for having had the strength to escape. I don't expect everyone to believe this account, but I guarantee I'm not making it up. It's the story I carry with me, a scar that taught me not to let myself be carried away by the song of those who seem to offer everything I lack. Sometimes the lack makes us see danger too late. Today I look at the farm where it all began as a distant place. It's where I was born, but also where I almost lost myself. If there's something supernatural in this world, I don't have an answer. I only know that whatever it is feeds on those who open too many doors to desperation. And I opened the door when I wanted to flee from everything that oppressed me. My name is Angelo, and since I can remember, I've carried a memory that makes me question what's real and what isn't. When I was very young, my parents faced serious problems and decided I would stay with my aunt and uncle for a while. It wasn't exactly my choice, but I ended up growing up with them and became quite attached to that simple, almost makeshift house in the rural area of a distant farming community in Nebraska. The house had no proper finishing, the walls weren't even completely painted, and the floor was still raw concrete. There were no paved roads, much less asphalt. Everything was dirt paths. The region had vacant lots, some with fruit trees and others full of tall weeds. The houses were separated by long stretches of empty land, so we rarely saw any neighbors except on special occasions. Despite the intense heat that usually hit that area, there was always a breeze coming from the rolling hills, which made the late afternoons more pleasant. My aunt and uncle were very simple people who always showed me affection. My aunt especially treated me like her own son. She cooked the foods I liked, took care of me when I got sick, and never let me lack the basics. She already had a son, Marcus, who was a teenager at the time. After some health complications, my aunt couldn't have more children. So when I arrived, she received me as an unexpected blessing. I was very small and learning to talk, while Marcus was almost a grown young man. Maybe that's why she spoiled me so much. Of course, from time to time, my aunt would get angry with me when I misbehaved or didn't do the chores they gave me. But I was never mistreated, and the years passed without major problems. When I turned 9, Marcus turned 18. He was always tall with strong arms because he worked heavy jobs alongside my uncle. Over time, I noticed that Marcus changed his behavior. He started spending more time alone, spoke little, and didn't seem as comfortable as before. He avoided talking even with me, who was like a younger brother to him. My aunt was worried and tried to find out what was going on, but he didn't give many clues. Once Marcus came home with torn clothes and a closed expression. My aunt insisted on knowing what had happened. "It was a branch that tore my shirt," he said simply. Nobody really believed that story, but there wasn't a long conversation about it. He just continued more silent. Still, he was hardworking. He helped with construction, cleaned lots, cut firewood, and did odd jobs on small farms nearby. There was also an uncle who fished and sometimes came back with good quantities of fish. It seemed like he did everything to keep himself busy. Marcus had some acquaintances, all young men who had grown up in that same region. One of these friends, David, invited Marcus to work on an elderly relative's farm who needed help taking care of animals and doing general services. These invitations involved spending days away from home, something that made my aunt a little anxious, but she allowed it because she trusted the people there. He always came back with some money. On one of these returns, I overheard a conversation between him and my uncle in the backyard. He was talking about something he had seen on the farm, but he didn't seem scared, just confused. He said it wasn't anything serious, but it had stuck in his head. He explained that sometimes they sent him to fetch cattle or lent him a horse to ride around the area. On one of these rides, still during the day, he saw something he couldn't explain. It was near a creek that cut through the land. He mentioned that the horse started getting agitated out of nowhere, as if it was bothered by something. Then, looking up, he saw a woman sitting on some rocks, washing something at her feet. The water was flowing with a reddish color, and he thought she might be injured. He called out to the woman to see if she needed help, but she didn't turn around. She seemed completely oblivious. The strange thing was that stretch was far from any house. There was no one around except him and the horse, which continued restless, trying to back away. He felt it was better to get out of there, turned around, and went back to the farm. He told David everything, who thought it might just be someone who lived in the area, but joked, "Maybe it's a witch," and laughed. Marcus didn't take it as a joke because, according to him, it didn't seem like just an eccentric old lady. Something about that woman's posture made him uncomfortable. He said that shortly after, on another occasion, he ended up seeing the same figure. He was near an abandoned house with broken tiles and peeling walls that belonged to a relative of David's. He reported that through the window he saw something moving against the wall. It was the same silhouette of a woman, but this time with a type of darker cloth covering her head. It seemed like a thick fabric, almost like leather, not the common kind that the village ladies wore. From then on, he became more reserved. He continued going to work, but you could tell he was uncomfortable. When they asked if he was going back to the farm, he said he wasn't in the mood anymore. He said it wasn't anything serious, he just didn't want to be so far away. At a certain point, he mentioned that it was as if he was being followed. He couldn't see clearly, but he had the feeling that woman would appear anywhere he went. David's aunt didn't report anything strange there, so my uncle didn't know what to say. I saw Marcus becoming increasingly withdrawn. He started having trouble sleeping and walked around with an air of constant worry. He even told a close person that he saw something moving in the corners of the land, like a shadow. Sometimes he thought it was loose cattle, but he wasn't sure. When I get closer, I don't see anything concrete. I just feel there's someone there, he said. From what I could tell, this was tormenting him. It wasn't open panic, but a discomfort that didn't let him be calm anywhere. He admitted he didn't want to set foot on David's relative's farm anymore. He said that when he went there, he felt a bad presence that followed him back. He said nothing physical had happened, but that uncertainty of what he might encounter left him without peace. My uncle even tried to talk to David's father, who lived in that area and had never seen anything strange. The man said it was a quiet place without reports of disturbing things. However, after thinking for a while, he remembered something that had occurred to him years ago in another mountainous region. He liked to hunt, and on one of these outings, he heard some screams that seemed like an animal in agony. He followed the noise and saw a donkey being dragged by something invisible. The animal struggled but disappeared into the brush, as if it were caught by a force he couldn't see. I was left without reaction, frozen in place. After that, I never risked going so far again. There are things beyond our understanding out there, he said. Marcus definitively decided not to return to the farm. He was already shaken by thinking that woman might be related to that unknown force. My aunt was worried and took her son to an old lady known for praying and removing frights. This woman did prayers, past branches of rue, and claimed that certain visions came from traumas or serious frights. She said there were cases of people who, by messing with old houses without permission, or by some injury when dealing with animals, ended up awakening something that attached itself to the person. He went through some sessions with her and seemed more relieved, but after a few days, he became restless again. Instead of seeing that figure only in the farm region, now he said he had seen something near the irrigation canals of our village. He said that sometimes he saw a dark figure moving. It wasn't a normal animal. It happened more at the end of the afternoon. He told my aunt about this, but she preferred not to spread it for fear of what others would think. Being a child, I didn't understand well, but I noticed something was wrong. I saw Marcus nervous, unable to find peace. I started to notice that he avoided emptier places and always looked at the corners, as if expecting to see that woman appear. One afternoon we were alone at home. My aunt had gone out and would take a while to return. He was on the sofa and called me with a strange voice. I approached, and he pointed to the hallway. He asked me to look at the room where he slept. At first, I didn't understand. The room was in twilight, but looking carefully, it seemed like something was moving in a corner near the bed. I thought it was just my imagination, but I insisted on looking and had the impression of seeing a silhouette. She moved slowly, crouched, didn't emit sound, but gave the sensation that there was a person or something similar to a person there. I was petrified. When I finally felt my legs, I ran to the backyard without thinking. Marcus didn't come after me. It seemed like he was already used to it. I stayed outside, sitting on a piece of log, trembling. I realized that Marcus wasn't making it up. He really saw something, and now I had seen it too. When my aunt returned, I didn't want to tell her right away because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me or blame me for snooping around. But this story didn't stop there. That night my uncle argued with Marcus, saying it was nonsense to fill my head with these things and that I was still too young for that. "You need to stop talking this nonsense around the boy," he said. Marcus didn't retort, stayed quiet, but I knew he hadn't told me anything on purpose. I was 9 years old and simply didn't want to sleep in my room. I went to my aunt and uncle's room, arranged a corner on the floor to lie down, and spent the night awake. Any noise made me tense, and the wind hitting the metal structure of the roof made me jump. It took me several days to get the courage to go back to sleeping in my own room. When I returned, I noticed that Marcus started having constant nightmares. He used to sleep like a rock, but now he tossed in bed, murmured, woke up sweating. Once I was unable to sleep and saw him with his eyes closed but restless. I got up to get water in the kitchen, and when I returned, I saw a person sitting on the edge of his bed. The dim light illuminated a figure that didn't move. I recognized something similar to that thick fabric he had described. I couldn't see the face, just a dark, hunched form. I was very afraid to call my uncle or aunt. It seemed like if I moved a finger, that figure would turn against me. The only thing I did was lie down again and cover my head, squeezing my eyes shut. I don't know how long I stayed like that. I only know that the next day, I woke up with my heart racing. My aunt and uncle already noticed that Marcus was downcast and that I wasn't well either. My aunt started talking to me gradually, trying to find out why I was so quiet. She didn't imagine that I had already seen the same entity that haunted Marcus. A few nights later, she found me sitting in the kitchen because I had woken up scared and didn't want to go back to the room. That's when she decided to call my father's mother, my grandmother, who was very religious. She thought that maybe praying a rosary at home could bring some peace because everything was strange, including the atmosphere inside the house. My grandmother had several little saints and liked to pray throughout the house. I remember that on the day she arrived, the atmosphere seemed heavier than normal, as if each wall was closed. I felt this even being young. Besides worrying about Marcus, who was clearly disturbed, I also started seeing her more and more. That woman passed by glimpses in the backyard, near trees, or even inside the house when everything was silent. It was as if she was part of the shadows, but with each appearance, she seemed more hunched and with even thinner hands, as if she was deteriorating before our eyes. I didn't really understand if that was a ghost, if it was a strange person, or a nightmare of mine. One day I came home from school and the door was unlocked. I entered and saw that there was someone in the living room sitting in my aunt's rocking chair. Before realizing who it was, I got a huge fright when I noticed it wasn't her. The daylight illuminated a little, but that figure remained half covered. I saw very thin hands, almost without flesh. She ran her fingertips along the arms of the chair, repeating the movement. At that instant, I ran out screaming and stayed in the backyard, unable to say anything. My aunt came trying to calm me down, but I just pointed inside. When she entered with me, there was no one. The chair was still. It was at that moment that she understood that something really wasn't right. The next day my aunt brought blessed candles, a container with holy water, and some images that she placed on each door. She started sprinkling water in the rooms and praying softly. I didn't understand the words, but I knew she was asking for protection against whatever was there. She placed a sacred image near my room, lighting a candle at night. In a way, this caused me both relief and distress, because the candle flame created shadows on the walls, and I was terrified that one of them would take shape again. I started waking up several times during the night, and the first thing I saw was that semi-illuminated image. I felt a chill, but couldn't do anything but turn to the other side and try not to think about what was surrounding us. One night I heard a creak, as if the floor or some beam was moving. I opened my eyes and kept looking at the door without courage to get up. I had the impression that the image by the door seemed bigger, as if its shadow occupied more space on the wall. I closed my eyes and stayed static under the blanket, praying mentally for it to go away. When morning came, I was exhausted. I knew Marcus was also going through similar things because I saw him waking up startled, asking for water or breathing heavily. We didn't talk much about it, maybe for fear of giving more strength to what was happening. Sometimes I tried to say I was scared, but he would ask, "Don't think about it. Try to sleep," as if ignoring it would solve it. But it didn't help much. I spent nights with nightmares, imagining a rotten face under that cloth, something that might not even be human. When I woke up, I didn't know if it had been a dream or reality, because everything was so vivid. Sometimes Marcus asked me to call my aunt because he said he felt short of breath, or that his head hurt a lot. He would sit on the bed sweating cold, and I would run to my aunt and uncle's room begging for help. My aunt would pray over his head, pass a wet cloth, and keep repeating low words like someone wanting to expel some evil. I would sit in a corner and try not to stare at the darkness. Then I would go back to bed but couldn't sleep. One night I got the courage to ask Marcus if he had seen the face of that woman. He looked at me as if he didn't want to answer, but in the end said he could never see her face because it was always covered or at angles that prevented seeing any detail. I thought about telling him that in my nightmares I had seen her with a completely deteriorated face, almost without human features, but I was afraid of making him even more disturbed. I stayed quiet, turned to the side, and let the subject die. My aunt didn't know what else to do. She was downcast, not sleeping well, praying alone in the corners of the house, until she decided to call an acquaintance of her mother-in-law, an old lady who conducted special prayers when someone thought there was something heavy haunting the family. She said it wasn't about folk healing or witchcraft, but devotion to expel bad energies. "I won't give any mystical explanation. I'll just pray for the protection of the house," she said when she arrived. I didn't see her doing anything but praying, but she was confident in what she did. Every night after the prayers, she asked me and Marcus to face each other while she touched our heads, asking God to ward off any bad influence. I felt a slight pressure, but nothing that hurt. She said we shouldn't name what surrounded us or try to understand what it was, because according to her, discovering certain things could be worse than enduring them until they went away. "Don't try to discover, don't try to name it, pray and ignore," she said. My aunt asked if it could be some spirit or haunting. The lady shook her head. "I prefer not to know. Sometimes people mess with abandoned houses or enter places where something got stuck in the past. Just strengthen your faith and don't give in to fear." She also said the result might not be immediate, but with perseverance, everything would eventually ease. She continued coming for a week, praying without missing a day. At first, I didn't see significant change, but I noticed the house became less heavy. Marcus was still closed off, but didn't seem so agonized. I myself managed to go back to sleeping without waking up so many times. Gradually, the feeling of suffocation diminished. It didn't resolve everything from one day to the next. But after a while, I realized I had gone several nights without seeing that woman. Marcus also didn't comment any more about figures or presences. At a certain moment, we realized she simply wasn't there. There was no goodbye, no final scene. It was as if she had left without a trace. My aunt continued lighting candles and putting holy water on doors for a good time, fearing she might return. I, still a child, prayed in my own way before sleeping, asking not to see anything more. I invented my own prayers when I didn't remember the official ones, but I pleaded with all sincerity for that not to appear again. Since then, Marcus returned to work, and although he remained somewhat quiet, he no longer showed that terrified expression. I also became more peaceful again, playing and sleeping without fear of every sound in the house. The curiosity, however, was never completely satisfied. Where did this covered woman come from? Did anyone know something similar? Nobody could answer. On David's farm, no one talked about apparitions anymore. It seemed like everything revolved around Marcus, as if she had appeared for him and then stuck to our family. Some thought it could be a lost soul. Others talked about a witch, but that didn't bring real clarification. They even tried to talk again with David's father, who went so far as to investigate more deeply with the neighbors, but found nothing beyond vague stories about people who messed with old lands, and none matched the description exactly. The truth is that when something like this gets into your daily life, it doesn't leave your memory so easily. Even if we try to forget, that memory remains that there's a dark side without explanation, something that can lurk where you least expect it. At the time, I had nightmares for several nights in a row, but at least the prayers seemed to bring relief. The lady who prayed never guaranteed that would disappear for good. She only said that God would protect our house and that we should trust. Over time, we didn't see that figure anymore. The candles continued to be lit, and the religious images remained standing on the furniture like an invisible barrier. No one dared to change or remove anything from there. It's strange to think that something like that, which messed so much with our routine, disappeared without any warning. But looking back, I feel grateful it wasn't worse. We were afraid, but we weren't physically attacked. Even so, the mark remained. Sometimes when I dream about that dark cloth and those thin hands, I wake up sweating, remembering how scary it was not knowing if she was in the corner of the room, or if everything was just an illusion. I think whether it was a real experience or not, I'll never know for sure. I just hope it stays away. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.